There was a time before philosophy, before temples, before written myths, when humans first began to fear something stranger than the dark itself. Not the predator hidden in the grass, but the feeling that what they saw might not be all that was there. A dream that felt real, a shadow that seemed alive, a dead face that stayed in memory like it was still breathing. This is the story of the first time humans questioned reality. And if you enjoy deep history, ancient mysteries, and long-form documentaries like this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for the journey. Night gathers fast over the plain, and for a long time that is all it is night. A drop in temperature, a thickening of shadow between trees, the cooling skin of stone, the small, practical fear of teeth in the dark. But then, somewhere in the long prehistory of our species, night becomes something more dangerous than a hunting ground. It becomes a problem for the mind. A human being sits beside a fire and watches a light move over the faces of others, over hands, over bone tools, over the shifting edges of the world, and begins to feel that what is visible cannot be trusted to stay itself. Flame turns one person into many versions of a person. A rock face seems flat, then alive. A branch becomes an arm, then a branch again. The dead appear in memory with the force of the living. A dream returns at dawn, carrying impossible scenes that still feel true. The world is no longer only a place to cross. It is becoming something to interpret. That change leaves no single clean beginning in the record. There is no first preserved sentence saying that reality feels unstable. There is no fossil of a thought. What survives instead are traces of a species whose inner life has begun to thicken. The evidence remains incomplete, but scattered signs suggest a turning point of enormous consequence. Human beings do not merely react to their environment anymore. They begin to stand at a slight distance from it, as if watching life happen while also living inside it. That distance is small at first, almost invisible. Yet from it comes religion, art, metaphysics, burial, myth, astronomy, philosophy, and eventually science itself. Before any formal system exists, before temples or written speculation or schools of thought, there is a quieter and stranger event. Humans begin to suspect that the world they experience is not the whole world there is. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. For hundreds of thousands of years, human ancestors survived by reading surfaces with extraordinary skill. Tracks in mud, broken stems, shifting winds, the color of fruit, the posture of prey, the meaning of a distant call. To stay alive is to notice accurately and respond quickly. In that sense, early human perception is practical before it is philosophical. It exists to guide the body through danger, hunger, cold, and opportunity. Yet practical perception has a hidden cost. The better a creature becomes at pattern recognition, the more vulnerable it may also become to false pattern. A rustling grass might be wind, but treating it as a predator is safer. A face glimpsed in shadow may not be a face, but the brain that sees agency before proof often lives longer than the brain that waits. Over immense spans of time, human cognition evolves under this pressure, sharpening its ability to infer what cannot yet be seen. And that same ability may be the seed of something much larger, a mind that does not stop at the surface of events, because it is built to expect causes behind appearances. So the first questioning of reality likely does not arrive as abstract curiosity. It arrives through survival. A sound means more than a sound. A shape means more than a shape. What is absent may matter as much as what is present. Humans become experts at sensing hidden things. The leopard behind the grass, the storm before the clouds break, the season turning in the behavior of birds, the intentions of another person concealed behind stillness. This is not yet metaphysics. It is more ancient and more bodily than that. But once a mind becomes skilled at treating the visible world as a set of clues to an invisible one, it has already crossed a threshold. It is no longer imprisoned in immediate sensation. It has learned to live between what appears and what may be. There is profound strangeness in that achievement. A lion inhabits the world, but as far as evidence suggests, it does not wonder whether the world itself is in some sense deceptive. Early humans, by contrast, seem gradually to develop an awareness that experience can mislead. A dream can feel real. A memory can intrude into the present with almost physical force. A voice can be imagined. A face can be recognized in stone. A person can die and yet remain vividly active in the minds of others. The gap between event and perception becomes impossible to ignore. Somewhere in the Ice Age, beneath cold skies and among migrating herds, a species begins to discover that its own mind is not a transparent window. It is an instrument, and perhaps an unreliable one. What that first realization feels like can only be inferred, but the landscapes of prehistory help. Imagine a small human group moving through glacial Europe or late Pleistocene Southwest Asia. The horizon is immense. Weather changes fast. Firelight carves islands of safety from a darkness crowded with noise. Children learn by watching everything. Adults carry memory as a collective resource where water lies, where game crossed last spring, where the cliffs become dangerous in fog, where strangers were once encountered, where someone died. The world is saturated with significance, because missing significance can kill. Yet it is also unstable. Snow erases tracks, floods alter riverbeds, herds fail to return, illness strikes without visible cause. A person who laughed yesterday is rigid by morning. Under such conditions, reality does not feel fixed in the modern sense. It is active, withholding, sudden, full of forces that can be sensed in their effects long before they are understood in their mechanisms. This is one reason the ancient human world may have been mentally richer than modern assumptions often allow. It is easy to imagine prehistoric people as practical but intellectually simple, trapped in the immediate needs of existence. The archaeological record suggests something more complicated. By at least 300,000 years ago, and probably earlier in some forms, hominins are already shaping tools according to mental templates rather than crude necessity alone. Later, humans transport pigments, collect unusual objects, decorate bodies, and eventually create images that serve no obvious survival function. Such behavior implies a mind capable of abstraction, symbolism, and delayed meaning. Scholars still debate exactly when symbolic consciousness fully matures, and no single explanation fully accounts for its emergence. But once symbols appear, reality is no longer just encountered, it is represented. And the represented world is always one step removed from the world itself. That step is crucial. To use a symbol is to accept that one thing can stand for another. Red ochre can mean blood, life, danger, status, transformation, or the dead. A carved object can hold identity. A gesture can bind a group. A mark can preserve intention beyond the present moment. This symbolic leap does not merely enrich communication, it transforms consciousness. The human mind begins to inhabit layers. There is the tree, and there is what the tree signifies. There is the body. And there is what the body becomes in memory, ritual, fear, and story. There is the animal seen in the valley, and there is the animal as ancestor, rival, guide, or omen. Once this layered perception becomes normal, questioning reality is not an occasional eccentric act. It becomes part of ordinary human life. The visible world starts to carry invisible meanings everywhere. Even the body itself may have contributed to this uncertainty. Human beings are unusual animals in the degree to which they can observe their own mental states, revisit the past, anticipate the future, and model the minds of others. That means a person can be frightened not only by what is happening, but by what might be happening, what once happened, or what someone else believes is happening. In evolutionary terms, this capacity is powerful. It supports planning, cooperation, teaching, deception, empathy, and social complexity. But it also introduces internal instability. The mind becomes a place where absent things have presence. A remembered grief can change the present body. An imagined danger can accelerate the heart. A dream can cling to waking thought. The boundary between outer and inner reality grows thin. There are hints of this in the long development of social life. Human survival depends increasingly on cooperation, and cooperation depends on shared assumptions. This food is forbidden, that place is dangerous. This person belongs, that death matters. These marks mean something. Shared reality is never only about brute fact, it is also about agreement. One lesser known but deeply important possibility is that humans do not first question reality in isolation, like lone philosophers under the stars, but collectively, around firelight, in mourning, in ritual, during migration, in the retelling of remarkable events. Groups begin to negotiate what is real together. One person dreams of the dead, another hears meaning in thunder, another notices a sign in the movement of animals. Over time, communities do not simply observe the world, they build frameworks for what counts as true, dangerous, sacred, or deceptive. Reality becomes social as well as sensory. That makes the first questioning of reality not a clean intellectual breakthrough, but a cumulative pressure inside the human condition. Strange experiences must be placed somewhere. Why does the sleeping person travel in dreams? Why does a body remain while the person seems gone? Why do echoes answer from empty places? Why does a face appear in firelit stone? Why does memory revive the absent so completely? Why does a trance, an illness, or a fever seem to open doors? Ordinary waking life keeps closed. No written records preserve those first responses. What survives in the record suggests only that human communities gradually begin behaving as though appearances are not final. They treat certain places differently. They preserve the dead. They repeat actions whose power cannot be reduced to immediate utility. They mark bodies and objects with meanings that outlast the moment. The practical world remains, but another world begins to press against it. This may be the deepest prehistoric revolution of all. Agriculture changes landscapes, metal changes power, writing changes memory, cities change scale. But before any of these, there is revolution in perception. Humans become creatures who live not only among things, but among interpretations. They do not merely see, they see as they do not merely remember, they re-enter. They do not merely fear, they imagine hidden causation. The world becomes doubled the thing and its meaning, the event and its sign, the death and whatever follows death, the dream and whatever it reveals, the shadow and whatever stands beyond the shadow. Once that doubling begins, It never truly ends. And so the first time humans question reality is probably not one moment, one place, or one people. It is a long awakening spread across generations so deep in time that names are impossible. It unfolds in cold camps, in narrow valleys, at cave mouths, beside corpses, beneath eclipse-darkened skies, in the stunned silence after a dream too vivid to dismiss. It emerges wherever the mind confronts an experience that ordinary perception cannot comfortably contain. Something is seen, but not understood. Something is gone, but not absent. Something is felt, but not visible. In that friction between appearance and meaning, a new kind of being comes into existence, the human being as interpreter, as doubter, as creature divided between the world and the mind's rendering of it. The rest of human history grows from that fracture. Every cosmology, every ritual descent into darkness, every sacred object, every philosophical argument about truth and illusion, every scientific attempt to distinguish perception from reality carries some echo of this first disturbance. Long before anyone speaks of matter and spirit, soul and body, truth and falsehood, waking and dream, there is already a human presence sitting in the uncertain radius of firelight, aware that what is given to the senses may not be all that exists. The animals beyond the flames remain dangerous. The cold remains real. Hunger remains immediate. But another danger has entered the world, along with another possibility. The world has become mysterious from the inside. That inward disturbance does not appear out of nowhere. It is built slowly by a kind of mind that evolution never designs for truth alone. It designs for persistence, for quick judgment under pressure, for useful conclusions reached before danger closes in. Long before human beings possess formal language in its full modern richness. Long before they carve systems of belief into stone or preserve abstract arguments in writing. Their minds are already becoming specialized for a difficult world. They must detect patterns rapidly, remember landscapes across seasons, infer intentions from small gestures, read emotion in faces, and predict outcomes from incomplete evidence. These capacities make survival possible, but they also reshape experience itself. They create a species that does not passively receive the world. It constructs versions of the world from fragments, guesses, memories, and expectation. That is where the deeper story begins. The first humans to question reality do so not because they are detached thinkers in the later philosophical sense, but because they inherit nervous systems that are increasingly powerful at filling in what is missing. A branch moved once in the grass may be enough to produce a whole imagined predator. A brief expression on another person's face may generate an elaborate inference about loyalty, anger, or threat. A season's change in wind, bird movement, and light can suggest what weather is coming weeks ahead. This ability to project beyond direct sensation is one of the great achievements of the human brain. It allows people to plan migrations, store food, cooperate in hunts, and manage relationships within groups that have become too socially complex for simple instinct alone. Yet the same ability carries a hidden consequence. Minds that are built to complete patterns do not only recognize the world, they also over-recognize it. They find order where there may be none, intention where there may be accident, hidden agency where there may only be weather, illness, or chance. This is not a flaw in some trivial sense. It is part of the price of intelligence. A brain that waits for certainty in a dangerous environment is often too slow. Better, in evolutionary terms, to assume the rustle is something alive. better to treat the unexplained sound as meaningful, the unfamiliar mark as a sign, the change in another person's tone as important. Human cognition becomes tuned not simply to what is there, but to what might be there. That single shift changes the emotional texture of existence. Reality becomes charged with possibilities that exceed immediate evidence. A clearing may contain more than trees. A silence may contain more than absence. The dead may be gone, yet not fully gone. The mind is now working in two directions at once, anchored in sensation but always extending itself beyond sensation. Memory deepens that split even further. Other animals remember, sometimes impressively, but human memory is unusual in the way it can be revisited, combined, narrated, and shared. A person is not merely shaped by past experience. A person can return to past experience internally, rework it, and project it onto the present. A dangerous valley encountered years ago can still alter the body before it comes back into view. A face associated with betrayal can transform trust before a word is spoken. A place where someone died can hold that death long after the body's gone. In this way, reality is no longer made only of what stands physically before the senses. It also contains what memory has layered onto it. A hill becomes not just a hill, but the site of a hunt, a birth, a storm, a killing, a return. The visible world accumulates invisible history. Human beings begin living in landscapes thick with remembered meanings. What makes this more than simple recollection is the social nature of memory. In early communities, no one survives by individual recall alone. Knowledge is distributed. One remembers the crossing place. Another remembers the season when the herd failed. Another knows which plants heal and which poison. Another recalls an encounter with strangers years ago near a certain river bend. These memories are repeated, revised, and fixed in story. A group therefore carries not only bodies through time, but mental maps built from shared experience. What counts as real is increasingly stabilized by collective remembrance. A location can be feared by those who've never seen the event that made it fearful. A path can be avoided because memory has outlived witness. This may be one of the lesser-known foundations of humanity's early metaphysical instinct. Communal memory creates durable realities that no longer depend on direct observation. At the same time, human beings develop another extraordinary capacity, one even more destabilizing than memory. They begin to model other minds. To live in a social group of growing complexity requires more than recognizing individuals. It requires guessing what others know, intend, hide, resent, desire, or fear. One hunter may conceal selfishness beneath cooperation. One parent may recognize danger in a child's silence. One rival may smile while planning harm. The world of immediate objects is therefore joined by a second world of inferred interiors. Human life becomes filled with invisible realities that are nevertheless treated as decisive. A thought cannot be seen, yet it changes behavior. An intention leaves no track in mud, yet it may determine whether a person lives or dies. The mind becomes accustomed to dealing seriously with unseen things. This is a major turning point. Once a species spends enough of its existence responding to invisible intentions inside other people, it becomes easier to imagine invisible intentions elsewhere. A storm may seem angry. A place may feel hostile. A successful hunt may seem granted rather than merely won. Scholars still debate how directly one can connect social cognition to the origins of religion, spirit beliefs, or animistic thinking. But the overlap is difficult to ignore. Human beings become specialists in agency detection. They live by asking who did this, who wants this, Who hides behind this event? Such thinking is adaptive in the human social world, yet when applied beyond the human social world, it may transform the entire cosmos. Reality begins to seem inhabited not just by objects and forces, but by presences. None of this requires written doctrine. It can emerge long before explicit explanation. A child raised in such a mental world learns almost immediately that appearances do not settle meaning. The face of an elder may look calm while grief works beneath it. The forest may look empty while danger waits in silence. A night sky may look unchanged while the season turns. The body of the dead may remain while something essential is felt to have departed. Human consciousness grows within a constant education in discrepancy. What is seen and what is understood are not always the same. This is the beginning of epistemic unease, though the phrase itself belongs to a much later age. Early humans likely feel it not as theory, but as atmosphere. The world is legible only in part. Language, once it becomes sufficiently flexible, amplifies this atmosphere with enormous force. It allows people not only to point to objects, but to name categories, imagine absent things, describe impossible combinations, and preserve events beyond the moment of direct experience. A spoken warning can make a danger present before it appears. A story can summon the dead, revive the distant, or carry a lesson from one generation into another. More importantly, language lets humans compare inner experiences. Someone can describe a dream, someone can report a vision, a strange feeling, an omen, an interpretation of illness, a memory that returns with force. Once private experiences become shareable, the gap between outer reality and inner experience becomes a collective problem. Communities must decide what to do with reports that feel true but cannot be verified in ordinary ways. Some are dismissed, some are feared, some become ritual knowledge. Some harden into tradition. In every case, language enlarges the world beyond what is immediately given. There is also the peculiar human relationship to time. Most animals are tied strongly to the present, even when they remember or anticipate. Humans, by contrast, increasingly inhabit layered time. They live in what has happened, what is happening, and what may happen. This produces anxiety, strategy, hope, grief, and foresight. But it also produces a strange loosening of reality. A future famine can affect present decisions. A remembered insult can shape present alliances. A coming winter can haunt a summer camp. The non-existent, in a literal sensory sense, begins to govern the existent. This is one of the quiet revolutions of the human mind. It becomes possible to be ruled by what's not here, and once that is normal, it is not difficult to imagine being ruled by powers not visible at all. Even perception itself is less stable than it seems. Modern neuroscience confirms what prehistory already lived through. The brain does not record reality like a neutral device. It filters, predicts, edits, and constructs. Of course, early humans do not know this in scientific terms, but they know something related in experience. They know that fatigue changes what the world looks like. Fear changes sound. Grief changes time. Hunger sharpens some details and erases others. Fever brings impossible images. Darkness animates still forms. Firelight makes walls breathe. The evidence remains incomplete for how prehistoric communities interpreted such experiences. But no single explanation fully accounts for their symbolic life without recognizing how deeply perception itself can shift under ordinary human conditions. To live in such a body is already to encounter a reality that moves. This is why the rise of symbolic consciousness is not just an artistic milestone but a cognitive threshold. A creature that can hold a symbol in mind is capable of maintaining something absent with enough stability to act upon it. That is an astonishing power. It means a mark can stand in for an animal, and the represented animal can matter as much as the one in the valley. It means a gesture can renew an old event. It means an object can hold a memory, a warning, or a claim. It means the world no longer ends at the edge of direct perception. Human beings are now surrounded by representations, and representations invite comparison with whatever they represent. Is the image the thing? Is the dream a message or only a dream? Is the ritual action changing the world or only expressing desire? Such questions may not yet be framed explicitly, but the mental terrain for them has already formed. One surprising detail is that some of the earliest convincing evidence of complex symbolic behavior does not appear in places of obvious abundance, but often under conditions of difficulty and pressure. Harsh climates, unstable resources, long migrations, and fragile group survival may have accelerated the need for stronger social coherence and deeper shared meaning. In other words, questioning reality may not emerge in spite of hardship, but partly because of it. When direct control over the environment is limited, invisible explanations become harder to avoid. When outcomes depend on many uncertain variables, minds search even more urgently for hidden order. Under these conditions, a world of signs is not luxury. It is a psychological necessity. So before there are philosophers, there are minds already haunted by their own capacities. They remember too much to live only in the present. They infer too quickly to trust every appearance. They imagine too well to remain confined to what is visible. They model unseen intention, build shared worlds through language, and move through landscapes layered with memory. From the outside, nothing dramatic announces the change. Camps rise and fall, herds move, children learn, elders die. But inside the species, something irreversible is happening. Reality is becoming double. The world as sensed remains vital, immediate, and often brutal. Alongside it grows the world as interpreted, predicted, narrated, and suspected. That second world is not secondary for long. It begins to direct action, shape fear, bind communities, and preserve meanings that outlast the moment. From here, dreams will matter. The dead will matter differently. Certain places will become thresholds. Images will begin to hold more than likeness. The sky itself will become a coded surface. Human beings are not yet asking, in clean philosophical language, whether reality is an illusion, but they are already living as though appearance is not enough. The mind that evolution built for survival has become powerful enough to unsettle the very world it was meant to navigate. Sooner or later, every human mind stumbles into the same unsettling fact: a person can go somewhere without moving. The body remains where it lies, curled against warmth or stretched beneath skins in the dark, and yet by morning the sleeper carries back impossible knowledge. He has walked with the dead. She has fallen from a cliff and felt the impact. A child has seen an animal no one else saw, or returned from sleep convinced that a distant place was visited in full detail. The camp wakes to the same cold air, the same fire ash, the same visible world, but one member of the group has been elsewhere. That elsewhere may not exist in any ordinary sense, and yet the experience is not weak. It may feel more vivid than daylight. It may change behavior. It may terrify, instruct, or linger for years. In dreams, early humans meet one of the first great fractures in reality. Experience can be intense, coherent, and emotionally real without belonging to the waking world at all. No written record preserves those first awakenings, but the universality of dreaming makes their significance hard to overstate. Every human society we know has had to account for dreams in some fashion. Some treat them as messages, some as noise, some as warning, memory, wish, revelation, or intrusion. Prehistoric people leave no theory behind, yet their mental lives are shaped by the same biological inheritance. They sleep, they dream, they wake changed. The evidence remains incomplete, but dreams are among the strongest candidates for one of the earliest sustained reasons humans began to suspect that reality had layers. In ordinary waking life, distance, death, and physical boundaries still matter. In dreams, they do not. The dead speak. The absent arrive. Bodies change form. Time breaks sequence. Places combine. Fear and desire produce worlds at once intimate and impossible. A mind that repeatedly undergoes such experiences cannot remain entirely satisfied with the visible surface of existence. Dreams alone would be strange enough, but they do not arrive in isolation. They belong to a broader family of experiences that ancient people must have found profoundly destabilizing. Shadows detach shape from substance. Reflections produce a second self in water or polished stone. Echoes answer from emptiness. A voice returns from rock as if the place itself has spoken back. A person glimpsed by firelight is made of movement and distortion. And on a cave wall or rough cliff face, the human brain finds animals, faces, eyes, and motion where there is only irregular stone. Even grief behaves this way. The dead are gone in one sense, yet remain in dreams, habits, remembered gestures, sudden flashes of almost presence. The body learns absence slowly. A person reaches for someone no longer there. For an instant, what is known and what is felt do not match. Reality splits again. To a modern mind, trained from childhood in distinctions between subjective and objective experience, these things can seem manageable. Dreams come from the brain, echoes are sound waves, reflections are optics. Grief is memory and attachment, yet even now they retain some of their force. A nightmare can haunt an entire day. A familiar voice heard unexpectedly in an empty room can raise every hair on the skin. A reflection seen at the edge of vision can trigger alarm before reason catches up. Early humans, without modern explanatory frameworks, would not have been less intelligent in confronting such events, but they would have encountered them in a different conceptual environment, one in which natural explanation was not yet separated from symbolic and social meaning. A dream of the dead would not simply be filed under internal neurological activity, because there was no such category. It had to be integrated into a lived world where the boundary between inner and outer remained far less secure. This is one reason double cells may have mattered so much in prehistory. The human being seems to have more than one version. There is the waking self, the sleeping self, the remembered self, the reflected self, the socially recognized self, and perhaps the self that departs at death. Scholars still debate how directly one can infer early soul concepts from burial or ritual evidence, and no single explanation fully accounts for the extraordinary variety of later beliefs. But what survives in the record suggests that humans became preoccupied very early with the possibility that the person was not reducible to the body alone. Dreams encourage this suspicion. The dreamer travels while the body lies still. Reflection encourages it in another way. The self appears outside the self, visible but untouchable. Shadows follow faithfully yet distort form, stretching, shrinking, detaching at dusk into something almost independent. The body becomes less simple once it is accompanied everywhere by replicas, projections, and absences. Water must have deepened this effect. Still, water offers one of the most uncanny experiences available to a human without any technology at all. A face appears from below, copying every movement, perfect and unreachable. Disturb the surface and the self dissolves. In streams and pools, the world itself doubles. Trees stand upside down. Sky descends into earth. Clouds move underfoot. A hand extended toward this second world meets only the breakable skin of water. It is difficult to know exactly how prehistoric people interpreted such moments, but they required no elaborate myth to be unsettling. They are immediate demonstrations that sight can present a coherent world which touch instantly denies. That contradiction lies near the centre of all later questions about reality. Which sense has authority, which world counts? What happens when the eyes say one thing and the hand another? Echoes pose a similar problem, especially in broken landscapes, ravines, and caves. A call goes out and returns altered, detached from its source. Sound becomes presence. Empty places reply. For a mind already tuned to hidden agency, such experiences are not trivial curiosities. They are evidence that the world answers. Even today, an unexpected echo can feel strangely animate. In darkness or in stone chambers, it easily takes on character, as though some intelligence has repeated the voice with slight resistance or delay. Prehistoric caves, with their constrictions, chambers, and resonant walls, may have magnified this effect dramatically. Some researchers have suggested that acoustics influenced where certain paintings or rituals took place, though the evidence varies and the broader picture remains debated. Still, the possibility is striking. A place that can throw back sound, distort space, and hold moving shadows is not a passive setting. It becomes an actor in human perception. Then there is death, the oldest and most relentless contradiction of all. A living person becomes a body, and yet the mind resists the transformation. The form remains familiar, the face is recognizable, the hands are still hands, but whatever animated them has gone. No single explanation fully accounts for how early humans understood this passage, and beliefs surely differed across time and population. Yet death almost forces a question about reality because it presents sameness and difference at once. The body is here, but the person is not. To say that life has departed is already to propose a hidden component of existence, and when the dead then return in dreams, memory, and felt presence, the problem sharpens. If they are gone, why do they remain active in experience? If they remain active in experience, in what sense are they gone? The archaeological traces of this mental tension appear gradually and unevenly. Some human ancestors may have left bodies exposed with little ceremony. Others, especially among later archaic and modern humans, begin placing the dead in pits, returning to burial places, and in some cases associating bodies with pigment, objects, or deliberate positioning. Interpretation is difficult. A burial is not a written confession of belief. It may reflect hygiene, protection from scavengers, emotion, social obligation, emerging symbolism, or ideas about an afterlife. Scholars remain cautious for good reason. Yet deliberate treatment of the dead suggests that death has become more than disposal. It is being marked. The person is being handled as though the transition matters in ways not fully visible. That alone points toward a mind already wrestling with realities that cannot be seen directly. dreams and death together may have been especially powerful. To dream of a dead relative is not merely to remember, it is to encounter. Many modern people, even those with strongly secular worldviews, describe such dreams as qualitatively different from ordinary memory. They feel charged, almost visitational. It would be surprising if prehistoric humans, who lacked later skepticism but possessed the same emotional architecture, found them less compelling. A dead person seen in dream can seem to prove continued existence. The sleeping mind offers not just image but event. Advice may be received, warning may be given, affection may return in full force. For a community already negotiating grief and continuity, such experiences could become foundational. The dead are not fully absent. Reality is not exhausted by waking life. This does not mean that every strange experience immediately becomes a full supernatural system. Human communities are capable of ambiguity, hesitation, and layered interpretations. Some dreams may be dismissed, others remembered. Some reflections may simply fascinate. Some echoes may amuse children before frightening them later in another context. What matters is not that one uniform doctrine appears, but that the human species repeatedly encounters conditions under which ordinary perception proves inadequate. There are events that feel true but cannot be located. There are presences without bodies, copies without substance, and journeys without movement. Over time, such experiences do not sit harmlessly at the edges of life. They influence ritual, memory, fear, and social explanation. They teach humans that the world may contain more than the daytime eye can certify. One surprising detail is that the language of doubling appears widely across later mythic traditions, from souls and spirits to dream bodies and shadow selves. Those later traditions are much younger than the prehistoric experiences that likely nourished them, and they cannot simply be projected backward without caution. Still, the recurrence is suggestive. Humans across time seem remarkably ready to imagine that the visible self is accompanied by another form of self. That tendency may not begin in abstract theology at all. It may begin in the simple fact that consciousness itself regularly produces doubles. The self appears in water, in dreams, in memory, in voice, in shadow, and finally in the minds of others after death. The person is never only one thing in human experience. This is where the questioning of reality becomes intimate. It is no longer only about storms, predators, or hidden forces in the landscape. It is about the instability of the self. Am I only this body? Where do I go in sleep? Why can the dead return to me more vividly in darkness than they did in life's final hours? Why does my reflection belong to me and yet stand apart from me? Early humans may not have phrased these thoughts in words that survive, or perhaps in words of such abstraction at all. But the experiences themselves were enough. They pressed on the same fault line again and again, teaching that what appears solid is accompanied by something elusive, and what seems absent can remain strangely near. Once that lesson takes hold, the ground is prepared for much more. A cave is no longer just shelter, it can become a threshold. An image is no longer just likeness, it can become a living presence. Ritual is no longer just repetition, it can become a way of navigating between seen and unseen worlds. The body itself has already taught the species how unstable experience can be in sleep, in mourning, in reflection, in sound. Humans discover that reality is not a single flat surface. It has depth, duplication, interruption. Beneath the practical daylight world runs another current, one made of visitations, traces, and echoes. And perhaps that is why these experiences endure so powerfully even now. Modern explanations have not removed their emotional structure. The old fracture remains inside the species. A person wakes from a dream and needs several seconds to decide which world is the lasting one. A reflection glimpsed unexpectedly still startles. The voice of the dead, remembered at the wrong moment, can still feel present enough to turn the head. Far back in prehistory, around fires and in darkness, those same shocks must have accumulated until they changed what it meant to be human. Reality was no longer simply what stood before the eyes in daylight. It had become something less stable, more layered, and more difficult to dismiss. The world had acquired doubles, and so had the mind. The body lies in the earth, but the problem refuses to go with it. That may be one of the oldest human realizations that leaves a mark strong enough for archaeology to detect. Death should be simple in a material sense. A living organism stops. Warmth fades. Motion ends. Flesh changes. Yet for human beings, death is almost never experienced as a plain biological event. It arrives as contradiction. The person is still visible and already absent. The face remains. Though no response comes back from it, the hand can still be held, but whatever once answered in that touch is gone. Even now, in a world saturated with medical explanations, grief often begins with disbelief. The mind knows and does not know at once. For prehistoric humans, living close to the body, close to decay, close to loss, that contradiction must have been even more immediate. Death presents one of the earliest and most powerful reasons to suspect that visible reality is incomplete. What makes it worse, or perhaps more generative, is that the dead do not stay neatly dead in experience. They return in memory with unbearable clarity. They appear in dreams. Their habits remain in objects, in paths through a camp, in the places they sat, in the tools they shaped, in the silence left by their absence. A group that loses one of its members is not dealing only with a missing body. It is dealing with the lingering structure of a person whose presence continues to organize the minds of the living. That persistence matters. It turns death into more than disappearance. It makes the dead socially active after bodily life has ended. No single explanation fully accounts for the origins of ancestor belief or mortuary ritual, but what survives in the record suggests that human communities begin very early to behave as though the transition from life to death requires more than disposal. The archaeological evidence is uneven, often frustratingly so. Bodies not ideas, and burials are not direct transcripts of belief. A grave may tell us that people cared, feared scavengers, marked territory, controlled smell, honoured status, or believed something about survival after death. Often it may reflect several of these at once. Scholars still debate many famous early burials precisely because the evidence remains incomplete. Some claims once presented with confidence have later been questioned. Pollen once thought to show flowers placed in graves may have come from burrowing animals. Objects once interpreted as symbolic offerings may have arrived through natural processes. The caution is necessary, yet even under the weight of caution, certain cases remain hard to dismiss, again and again. Bodies seem to be placed deliberately, protected, returned to, or treated in ways that imply the dead have become a special category of reality. Among Neanderthals, and later among Homo sapiens, there are multiple sites suggesting deliberate handling of the dead, though the details vary and interpretation remains contested. Shanidar Cave in Iraqi Kurdistan has long stood at the centre of these debates. Some of its individuals appear to have been intentionally placed, and one famous case was once associated with flower pollen, leading to romantic visions of prehistoric funerals. That particular interpretation is now disputed, and scholars are more cautious than earlier generations were, but even stripped of the flowers, the broader fact remains, striking certain bodies seem not to have been left where they fell. They were placed in relation to space, to sediment, to community, elsewhere, at sites such as Kafse and Skul in the Levant. Early modern human burials include bodies positioned with apparent care, sometimes associated with red ochre or selected objects. These are not yet temples or written religions. They are simpler and, in a sense, stranger. They are acts performed in the presence of the dead by people who may not fully separate emotion, symbolism, and ontology the way later societies try to. Red ochre appears again and again in this long story, and its persistence is difficult to ignore. Ground into powder and spread like blood-coloured dust, it travels across prehistoric contexts with the symbolic force scholars still debate. Sometimes it is associated with bodies, sometimes with art, sometimes with objects. No single meaning can be assigned everywhere, and any attempt to force a universal code onto it would be misleading. Yet its association with the dead in multiple regions strongly suggests that colour itself had become part of humanity's earliest negotiations with unseen reality. Ochre is earth, but transformed. It stains skin, bone, and burial fill with the colour of life, injury, sunset, and raw flesh. To place it with the dead may have been to mark passage, retain vitality, distinguish sacred status, or bind the body back into a meaningful order. What survives in the record suggests not certainty, but deliberate symbolism. Death is no longer left unmarked. That marking changes the meaning of place as well. Once a body is buried deliberately, a location becomes more than ground. It becomes memory fixed in space. The dead remain somewhere. A camp may be revisited partly because its dead are there. A cave may gather significance because bodies rest within it. Later ancestor traditions in farming and urban societies are much richer in evidence, but the roots of that relationship may lie far earlier, in the simple but profound act of placing the dead in a location that can be remembered. A place now contains more than stone, soil, and shelter. It contains a social presence that extends beyond life. This is one of the quiet foundations of sacred geography. Before mountains become homes of gods or groves become sanctuaries, burial may already be teaching humans that some spaces hold the invisible more densely than others. There is another unsettling element in this story. Some of the dead are not treated the same way. Archaeology suggests variation by age, status, time period, region, and perhaps cause of death. Some individuals receive careful placement, others do not. Some remain with objects, others are bare. Some burials appear isolated, others cluster. This unevenness matters because it shows that prehistoric humans are not merely reacting to death with reflexive grief. They are differentiating among deaths. They are classifying transitions. The social self continues after bodily life, at least in how the living organize their response. That alone hints at a growing sense that persons belong to more than biological existence. Their meaning survives them in structured ways. In some cases, the dead are handled long after burial. Bodies are reopened, bones moved, skulls separated, remains curated, revisited, or incorporated into later ritual settings. These practices become more visible in later prehistory, especially in Neolithic contexts, but they likely emerge from deeper habits of thinking. A body can become a relic of personhood rather than a mere remnant. The skull, in particular, seems to acquire special force in several later societies. That development should not be projected backward too mechanically, yet it is consistent with a very old human tendency. The dead are not only absent persons, but continuing social entities. This helps explain why ancestor presence becomes such a powerful feature in human history. Ancestors do not need to be imagined as fully embodied ghosts from the beginning. They only need to remain active enough in memory, dream, place, and ritual for the living to keep negotiating with them. Dreams almost certainly feed this negotiation. A buried person continues to appear in sleep. Advice, warning, affection, accusation, or reassurance may be experienced with startling immediacy. For a society without modern distinctions between internal hallucination and external visitation, such dreams can become evidence. Even in modern secular life, dreams of the recently dead are often described not as random memory fragments, but as encounters. The emotional structure is powerful and probably ancient. If burial physically removes the dead from daily space, dreams return them by night, renewing the sense that death is only partly visible. The body is under stone or earth, but the person remains active in another register. Reality widens to hold both facts at once. This may be why mortuary practice often combines tenderness and management. The dead are loved, feared, honoured, and contained. They are placed carefully, but also separated from the living. Such actions suggest ambiguity rather than neat doctrine. The dead are not simply gone, but neither are they harmlessly present. They belong to a threshold state, and thresholds demand ritual. Scholars still debate how much of early burial behaviour reflects explicit cosmology, and how much emerges from emotion, social cohesion, or practical adaptation. But the distinction may be too sharp for prehistoric minds. Emotion, symbolism, fear, and metaphysics likely overlap from the beginning. A body is buried because grief demands it, because danger may linger, because memory requires a place, because the person still matters, because the transition feels unfinished. These are not separate reasons so much as facets of one human response to a reality that has become unstable. There is also the matter of time. Burial extends the presence of the dead far beyond the event of death itself. A corpse left exposed changes quickly and may vanish into scavengers, weather, and soil. A buried body remains, however transformed, within a known place. That continuity allows the dead to persist socially. People can return. Stories can attach to the grave. Children can learn who lies there. In this way, burial helps create historical consciousness. The living now dwell not just with one another, but with preceding generations fixed beneath the landscape. The world thickens. Time becomes layered underfoot. Human groups are no longer only moving through a present environment, they're moving across deposits of former lives. This may be one reason ancient landscapes so often feel haunted in later tradition. They are literally full of the dead, and humans have known that for a very long time. One lesser known but revealing detail is that some of the earliest clear burials seem to involve individuals whose bodies already tell stories of care during life. At Shanidar, one Neanderthal survived multiple injuries and impairments, including serious trauma that would have made ordinary subsistence difficult. Interpretations remain debated, but many researchers see evidence that others supported him for years. If so, death did not create concern for the person out of nothing. Burial extended an existing social commitment. That continuity matters. It suggests that the dead remained significant not because ritual suddenly invented them, but because long social bonds made their disappearance intolerable as a purely material fact. The stronger the social mind becomes, the more impossible it is for death to remain simple. From here, ancestors are not yet fully formed as later civilizations will imagine them, but their outlines are beginning to appear. The dead are local, the dead are remembered, the dead return in dream and habit, the dead alter place, the dead require actions from the living. In all of this, the visible body is only part of the story. Something about the person persists in social reality, whether or not anyone could define exactly what that persistence was. This is the ancient beginning of a question that will echo through every later religion and philosophy. What is it that goes missing at death? And where does it go? The answer remains uncertain because the evidence remains indirect, but the emotional and symbolic trajectory is unmistakable. Humans do not respond to death as though reality has stayed intact. They respond as though a rupture has opened between appearance and truth. The body says one thing, experience says another. Burial stands at that rupture like one of humanity's earliest acts of interpretation. It does not solve the problem, it acknowledges it. The dead are placed into earth, into memory, into ritual, into community narrative. They are removed from sight and preserved in significance. And once that begins, the world is never merely populated by the living again. It becomes shared with absences that behave like presences. A valley contains not only game and weather, but those buried nearby. A cave contains not only darkness and shelter, but a memory of those placed within it. The landscape starts to gather invisible inhabitants. Humans are now living in a reality where the most important things are sometimes the least visible. That lesson, learned beside graves long before philosophy, will prepare them for the next threshold, places where the world itself seems to loosen, where darkness, stone, and firelight make reality flicker in front of their eyes. There are places where the world does not behave normally. A cave mouth opens in stone, and the ordinary rules of distance, sound, and light begin to fail almost at once. Outside, the sky governs vision, space stretches into horizon, wind explains movement, daylight flattens surfaces into clarity, but step into the earth and everything changes. Sound lingers too long. Darkness is not empty but dense. Walls seem near, then far, then suddenly alive in the edge of firelight. Shapes emerge and withdraw, moisture glints like eyes, footsteps answer from unseen chambers. Time itself alters in the absence of sun. For prehistoric humans, caves are not merely convenient shelters or occasional ritual sites. They are among the first environments that systematically destabilize perception. They make the world feel layered, hidden, and responsive. They teach, with unusual force, that reality depends on where one stands and how one is able to see. This matters because questioning reality is not born only from inward experiences like dreams or grief. It is also born from places that act upon the senses. A cave is one of the most powerful such places in the prehistoric world. It compresses the human body into narrow passages, then releases it into chambers beyond expectation. It turns a small flame into a moving theatre of shadows. It converts a painted wall into a shifting field of partial forms. It strips away most of the visual certainty humans rely on outside. In bright open country, a tree is a tree from across the valley. In a cave, a protrusion may become an animal head, then stone again. A ceiling stain may resemble movement. A handprint can seem to hover. The evidence remains incomplete for exactly how Ice Age people interpreted these experiences. But no single explanation fully accounts for the use of caves in later Paleolithic art without recognizing that caves themselves are perceptual machines. Many caves were never ordinary living spaces. Some decorated caves in Upper Paleolithic Europe lie deep underground, difficult to access, requiring effort, orientation, and light to enter at all. That fact alone suggests that at least some cave visits served purposes beyond daily shelter. At Chauvet, Lascaux, Altamira, and many lesser-known sites, paintings and markings appear in chambers where darkness is total without flame. Reaching them could involve crawling, climbing, navigating constrictions, and carrying combustible material into uncertain air. This is not casual behavior. It implies intention strong enough to overcome discomfort, danger, and inconvenience. Scholars still debate what that intention was. Hunting magic, social teaching, cosmological symbolism, trance-related activity, clan identity, and aesthetic expression have all been proposed, among other explanations. Each captures part of the picture. Yet beneath them all lies a simpler and perhaps older fact: caves create an altered world, and humans repeatedly sought that altered world out. Firelight transforms everything inside it. A steady electric glow reveals. Firelight conceals while revealing. It sharpens one edge and dissolves another. It makes surfaces ripple, shadows elongate, and contours appear to move. A painted bison on an uneven wall is not just seen in firelight, it is activated by it. The bulge of stone becomes shoulder, a crack becomes spine. Multiple legs painted in sequence may shimmer as if in motion when the flame shifts. Some researchers have argued that certain Paleolithic artists deliberately used wall relief to create this effect, and at several sites that seems highly plausible. The animals do not merely occupy the rock, they emerge from it. What survives in the record suggests that prehistoric image-making in caves was often inseparable from the dynamic conditions of cave perception itself. In such settings, reality does not appear stable. Stone becomes image, image becomes movement, and the boundary between natural form and human intention grows difficult to separate. That blending may be one reason caves feel so unlike the ordinary world above ground. They are not empty canvases. They already contain forms waiting to be noticed. Paleolithic artists often seem to work with the wall rather than against it, using bumps, fissures, curves, and hollows as part of the image. This is a crucial detail. It means the cave is not simply a place where humans impose meaning. It is a collaborator in the making of meaning. A horse may be found in a curve before it is completed in pigment. A lion's head may depend on a shadow the wall already casts. Human perception here operates at the threshold between discovery and invention. Is the animal seen because it is there in the stone, or because the mind supplies it? The question is ancient, and caves make it unavoidable. They expose how readily the brain populates ambiguity with life. There is also the acoustical dimension. Some cave chambers amplify footsteps, swallow sound, or return voices with startling force. Others muffle speech and isolate the listener in a kind of sensory narrowing. A few studies have suggested correlations between decorated areas and unusual acoustics in certain sites. Though this varies and should not be overstated, still, the broader point stands: in caves, sound does not behave like open air. It comes back altered, delayed, locationless. A voice can seem detached from the speaker. Percussive rhythms may resonate through stone in bodily ways. Even simple breathing becomes more noticeable when every sound is enclosed. For human beings already primed to detect hidden presence, caves do not merely hide things from sight. They make the invisible audible. An empty chamber can seem inhabited without any doctrine at all. The place itself becomes active. What makes caves especially important in this story is that they bring together many of the forces already shaping early human consciousness. Darkness disturbs visual certainty. Echoes suggest answering presence. Isolation alters emotion. Firelight animates the inanimate. Constriction and depth generate threshold experiences. If the dead are already felt to linger, if dreams have already taught that one can enter other worlds, if reflections and shadows have already made identity uncertain, then caves offer a physical architecture for all those intuitions. They are entrances into somewhere that is geographically real, yet experientially different. One does not need later mythology to see why they could become powerful. They already behave like boundaries between ordinary and extraordinary reality. This may help explain why caves and rock shelters preserve not only images of animals, but also hand stencils, abstract signs, dots, lines, and repeated motifs whose meanings remain uncertain. Some may encode information, some may mark presence, some may belong to shared symbolic systems now lost beyond recovery. Scholars still debate their interpretation, and the evidence remains incomplete. But their very existence matters. Humans are not only painting what they see, they are marking a zone of altered perception with signs that extend beyond simple depiction. A hand stencil is especially striking in this context. It is at once presence and absence, body and trace, proof that someone was here and ghostly evidence of someone no longer here. In the deepest dark, a sprayed outline of a human hand can feel less like decoration than like a signature left at the edge of another world. One lesser-known and revealing aspect of many cave sites is how selective they are. Not every available wall is used, not every chamber is marked. Certain passages seem to attract repeated attention while others are ignored. This selectivity suggests that ancient people were responding to more than available surface area. They may have favoured particular visual effects, acoustics, wall shapes, access routes, or inherited traditions attached to certain spots. In other words, the cave is not just underground space, it is internally differentiated, almost like a landscape of significance within a larger hidden realm. Some places inside it matter more. That pattern resembles later sacred geography in miniature. The unseen world is not uniform. It has centres, thresholds, and charged points. It is also possible that entering deep caves changed the body in ways prehistoric people would have felt strongly, even if they did not theorize them. Reduced light alters orientation. Enclosed air changes breathing. Long movement through darkness heightens tension and anticipation. Fear sharpens attention to small stimuli. A person entering such spaces with expectation, ritual preparation, or group support might experience them not just as locations but as states. This is important because the first questioning of reality is never purely intellectual. It is bodily. The body in darkness becomes easier to mislead, easier to move emotionally, and more aware of its own vulnerability. A cave does not ask for abstract speculation. It imposes altered awareness directly. That altered awareness may also explain why caves so often seem connected, across much later human cultures, with origins, ancestors, underworlds, spirits, hidden knowledge, and emergence. Those later beliefs vary enormously and cannot be folded carelessly into Paleolithic Europe or much earlier prehistory. Yet the recurrence is suggestive. Caves feel like interiors of the earth. They swallow light, preserve bones, conceal water, and open unexpectedly into chambers that no surface traveller would predict. They are natural theatres for the idea that reality has depth. To enter one is to leave the obvious world and trust a narrow field of perception inside a space older than memory. That experience alone can support symbolic power. What survives from Ice Age cave art suggests not a single doctrine, but repeated human willingness to use these spaces for activities saturated with meaning. Animal figures dominate many famous sites, but not always the animals most often eaten. Dangerous species, powerful species, composite forms, and enigmatic signs all appear. This has led scholars away from simplistic hunting magic explanations, though such ideas once dominated interpretation. No single framework fully accounts for the imagery. The caves seem to host a different order of representation, one not reducible to daily subsistence. That difference matters. It implies that underground space helped humans think and feel beyond immediate practical life. Reality was being explored, not merely recorded. By this point in the long human awakening, the cave may have become one of the earliest reliable ways to induce the sensation that the world is not what it first appears to be. Above ground, uncertainty can intrude unexpectedly through dream, grief, weather, or reflection. Underground, uncertainty is built into the environment. The senses must negotiate incomplete information at every moment. Meanings multiply. The human mind, already evolved to find forms and causes behind surfaces, does the rest. It sees movement in stillness, presence in emptiness, messages in marks, animals in stone. It feels that some places are not just places. That intuition will soon become even more powerful when image itself begins to play against perception, when artists use rock, light, and animal form so skillfully that the wall seems to contain life waiting to emerge. But before that next threshold, the cave has already done its work. It has shown human beings that reality changes under altered conditions of light, sound, and place. It has made the visible unstable. It has turned stone into theatre and darkness into a medium of knowledge. In those underground chambers, surrounded by ancient rock and moving fire, humans discover something that will never leave them seeing is not simple, and the world may hold far more than daylight ever reveals. Once humans begin making images in places where light itself is unstable, the question of reality grows sharper. A painted animal on a flat surface is one thing. A painted animal on a curved wall, broken by cracks, swelling over natural bulges in stone, and seen only by the uncertain pulse of flame, is something else entirely. It does not merely represent life. It seems to borrow from life's conditions. It waits for movement in the viewer, in the fire, in the shifting angle of approach. Then it changes. A body lengthens, legs multiply, a horn appears and vanishes. A muzzle pushes out of darkness as though it had always been inside the wall and is only now deciding to emerge. In that moment, the human mind is forced into an ancient ambiguity. Is this an image or an event? Is the animal absent or somehow present through likeness? The line between depiction and manifestation begins to blur. This is why prehistoric art matters so much to the story of reality. It is not simply evidence that early humans could draw well, or that they enjoyed decoration, or that they had aesthetic sensibilities comparable in depth to much later peoples. It is evidence that they had learned how to create presences from surfaces. That is a profound ability. To paint is not only to copy what is seen. It is to bring something not currently there into the field of perception with enough force that others respond to it. An image is absence made visible. It is a controlled hallucination shared by a group. Once humans understand that they can place a form on stone and cause minds to feel recognition, fear, reverence, or uncertainty, the world changes again. Reality is no longer only discovered, it can be staged. Many of the most famous Upper Paleolithic images seem almost designed to exploit this uncertainty. At Chauvet Cave, lions, rhinoceroses, horses, and other animals are drawn with extraordinary sensitivity to contour and motion. Some walls carry repeated outlines or multiple legs that may suggest sequence, accumulation, or movement under flickering light. At Lascaux, the scale, density, and placement of animals create an environment rather than a collection of separate pictures. In some locations, natural rock relief becomes part of the body of the creature. Scholars still debate the full meaning of these choices, and no single explanation fully accounts for them. But what survives in the record suggests that Paleolithic artists were not indifferent to the conditions under which images would be seen. These were not diagrams pinned under neutral light. They were forms embedded in darkness, activated by moving flame, and inseparable from the sensory instability of the caves themselves. That instability matters because the human brain is extremely sensitive to implied motion and incomplete form. A few lines can suggest a whole body. A partial contour can trigger recognition before conscious thought catches up. Under uncertain viewing conditions, the mind fills gaps aggressively. It anticipates the rest of the animal, the turn of the head, the thrust of the shoulders. In practical life, this helps humans survive. In art, it creates something stranger. The viewer collaborates in making the image alive. A cave painting is therefore never just pigment on stone. It is a meeting point between mark and expectation, between material trace and mental completion. The animal appears partly because the artist made it, and partly because the viewer cannot help but finish it. This may explain the power of composite beings in prehistoric imagery. Animal-human hybrids, ambiguous bodies, and forms that resist clean classification occur in a number of Paleolithic contexts, though they are rare compared with ordinary animal figures. The famous ivory figurine from Hohenstein-Stadel, often called the Lion Man, remains one of the most extraordinary examples. Carved tens of thousands of years ago, it appears to combine a human body with the head or face of a cave lion. Interpretations remain disputed. Was it a spirit being, a mythic figure, a ritual object, a symbolic experiment, something else entirely? The evidence remains incomplete. Yet the mere existence of such objects tells us that humans are not only representing the world as it appears in daylight, they are imagining beings that occupy unstable categories. That is a major threshold. Once the mind becomes comfortable with forms that cross the boundaries of ordinary experience, it is already thinking beyond immediate reality. The same can be said of certain painted figures that seem neither fully human nor fully animal, or whose meaning remains opaque because the categories we bring to them may be much younger than the images themselves. A masked person, a therianthropic figure, a body in motion half lost in line and contour. These are difficult not because prehistoric people lacked clarity, but because they may have been working in a symbolic register where transformation mattered more than fixed identity. The world, in such a view, is not made of separate stable kinds. It is made of thresholds, crossings, correspondences. An animal can be more than an animal. A human can become something else in ritual, dream, or image. Reality becomes porous. This porosity is one of the deepest clues prehistoric art gives us. It suggests that the early questioning of reality is not only skeptical in the later philosophical sense, as though humans were merely asking whether the senses deceive, it is also expansive. The world may contain more forms of being than ordinary waking perception allows. art becomes one of the first technologies for making those hidden possibilities visible. Not visible in the sense of scientific demonstration, but visible enough to affect bodies and minds. A painted horse can make a chamber feel inhabited. A carved hybrid can make a community feel the nearness of another order of existence. Whether those presences were understood as spirits, ancestors, dream beings, or something now beyond recovery, the effect would have been real in the social and emotional sense. The image mediates between worlds. One surprising feature of prehistoric art is how often it avoids simple narration. There are scenes, rare and debated, but much of the imagery does not tell a straightforward story the way later historical art often does. Instead, it accumulates. Animals cluster, overlap, face different directions, emerge from stone at different scales and depths. Signs repeat with no obvious key. Human figures are scarce or partial as many famous caves. This creates an unusual visual environment. The viewer is not guided through a single explanatory sequence. The viewer is immersed in a field of presence and relation. That visual mode fits the broader mental world already taking shape in prehistory. Reality is not yet organized into clear categories of myth, natural history, religion, and art. These things overlap. The wall becomes a place where many layers of significance can coexist without being forced into one explicit argument. It is also worth noticing that image making is itself an act of transformation. Pigment must be gathered, ground, mixed. Surfaces are selected. The hand learns pressure, line, contour, economy. A creature seen in memory or in life is translated into mark. That process turns fleeting perception into durable trace. It captures motion in stillness and gives absence a lasting form. In this sense, prehistoric artists are doing something very close to what later philosophers and priests will do in language. They are stabilizing an encounter with the uncertain. They are making the invisible negotiable. The animal no longer has to be physically present in the valley. It can be recalled, invoked, surrounded, perhaps engaged under conditions humans partly control. Art does not remove mystery. It houses it. This may be why images can feel so dangerous or sacred in many later societies. An image is never only an image once a culture grants it efficacy. It can wound symbolically, protect, attract, embody, watch, or remember. We should be cautious about projecting those later attitudes directly onto the Paleolithic past. Still, the roots are easy to see. When an image under firelight seems to move, when a hybrid figure suggests a being not encountered in daylight, when a hand stencil leaves a person present through absence, representation itself becomes uncanny. The wall does not merely stand for reality, it competes with it, it extends it. In some sense, it creates a secondary world within the first. There is a dry but revealing understatement buried inside all of this. Humans are learning to be persuaded by things they themselves have made. That is an extraordinary development. A mark on stone, clearly produced by human action, can nevertheless generate awe, fear, reverence, or a felt encounter with something beyond the maker. Later civilizations will fill entire temples with such objects and build whole religions around them. But the underlying cognitive event is already present here. Humans make forms that exceed the immediate practical purpose of making, and then submit themselves to the reality those forms produce. They become participants in worlds partly of their own symbolic construction. This is not delusion in any simplistic sense. It is the foundation of culture, ritual, myth, and eventually theory. but it also means that reality for humans is no longer separable from representation. The less stable the viewing conditions, the stronger that effect may become. In full daylight, a painted line can be inspected and reduced to material fact. In darkness, by contrast, with expectation heightened and bodies already unsettled by cave space, the same line can seem charged with emergence. Some researchers have even suggested that Paleolithic art may have been meant to be experienced sequentially by movement through space, with figures appearing and disappearing as the torch shifts. Whether or not that was always deliberate, the effect is plausible. The cave teaches that reality is perspectival. What is visible depends on position, timing, and light. An image partly seen may be more powerful than one fully explained. This brings the story very close to later philosophical concerns without yet becoming philosophy. Humans are discovering that perception is active, unstable, and deeply shaped by conditions. They're discovering that likeness can produce presence, that symbols can alter emotion and action, that boundaries between categories can be crossed in image before they are argued in words. Most importantly, they're discovering that the world humans inhabit is partly made of what humans can bring forth in one another through signs. The animal in the cave is not alive in the biological sense, yet it is not dead matter either. It occupies a third space, a reality of image sustained between wall, light, and mind. From there, the next step is almost inevitable. If images can make absent beings present, if caves can function as thresholds, if dreams can carry the dead and reflection can double the self, then some humans may begin to specialize in crossing those boundaries more deliberately. Not everyone sees in the same way. Not everyone enters darkness with the same purpose. Some become keepers of signs, interpreters of altered experience, guides at the edge between what is shared and what is revealed. Whether we call them shamans, ritual specialists, or something more cautious, they belong to a world in which reality is already no longer singular. The wall has started moving. The image has started breathing. And once that happens, someone will try to step through. Not everyone in an early human community would have moved through uncertainty in the same way. Some people would have been better at reading tracks, some at remembering routes, some at binding wounds, some at calming fear, some at speaking with authority when a group needed meaning more than explanation. Once reality begins to feel layered, once dreams carry the dead, caves distort the senses, images seem to move, and places accumulate invisible force, it becomes likely that certain individuals gain status by navigating those layers more convincingly than others. This is where the figure often called the shaman enters the story, though the word itself comes from a much later and much more specific cultural context. Scholars use it cautiously, and with good reason. It can flatten enormous differences between societies separated by time, language, and worldview. Still, some kind of ritual specialist almost certainly existed in many prehistoric communities. The evidence remains incomplete, but no single explanation fully accounts for the repeated human tendency to set apart certain people as mediators between ordinary life and altered states of experience. Those altered states do not require elaborate doctrine to become powerful. Fasting changes perception, exhaustion changes it, repetition changes it, drumming, dancing, darkness, isolation, pain, breath, fear, and expectation all change it. Human neurobiology is highly responsive to rhythm and stress, and even without plant intoxicants or formal ritual systems, the body can be pushed into conditions where the boundaries of self, place, and time begin to loosen. A person who enters such a state may see movement where others do not, feel presences, hear meanings in sound, or return with an account of where the mind has gone. In communities already disposed to take dreams, ancestor presence, and symbolic places seriously, such experiences would not be trivial private episodes. They would become socially consequential. Someone who could reliably cross into another register of experience and survive the crossing might be feared, trusted, or both. This is one of the central difficulties in interpreting prehistoric ritual. Archaeology can show unusual spaces, unusual objects, repeated patterns, body modification, costume elements, musical instruments, or imagery suggestive of transformation. What it cannot do easily is recover the exact experience of the participants. A painted chamber may have hosted initiation, healing, storytelling, trance, or all of these at once. A carved object may have been ornament, emblem, mnemonic aid, or sacred instrument. Scholars still debate the degree to which Paleolithic cave art, portable figurines, and unusual burials reflect shamanic practice in any specific sense. Some interpretations, especially in the late 20th century, leaned too confidently on broad cross-cultural analogies. Later researchers pushed back, emphasizing variation, caution, and the risk of imposing a single model on a deep and fragmented past. That caution is justified, yet the broader idea remains persuasive. Early humans almost certainly cultivated special states of consciousness, and some individuals likely became skilled at managing them. The appeal of such specialists would have been practical as well as metaphysical. A group living under constant environmental uncertainty does not only need food and shelter, it needs coherence. It needs ways to process grief, conflict, fear, illness, and unexplained failure. If a child grows sick with no visible wound, if animals vanish from expected routes, if a dream disturbs the camp, if a burial seems to require a sign, someone has to interpret the break in ordinary reality. Ritual specialists provide exactly that service. They turn uncertainty into structure. They may not solve the unknown in the modern scientific sense, but they make it livable. A trance, a chant, a painted figure, a guided descent into darkness, a repeated gesture around a body. All these can transform chaos into a sequence of meaningful acts. That matters because human beings can survive material hardship more easily than unframed uncertainty. There may also have been a social logic to altered states. If most people encounter the unstable edges of reality unpredictably in dreams, grief, fever, fear, then a specialist who enters such states intentionally seems to possess unusual authority. That authority need not rest on deception. The experiences may be fully real to the person undergoing them. Modern psychology, neurology, and anthropology all suggest that human consciousness is capable of profound shifts under the right conditions. Visionary states can be induced. Dissociation can occur. The body can feel detached. Patterns can become overwhelming. The self can seem to dissolve or split. Ancient people did not need scientific vocabulary to know that some minds crossed thresholds, others rarely approached. What survives in the record suggests that many societies treated such crossings as valuable rather than pathological, provided they could be integrated into communal meaning. Caves may have been ideal settings for this. They isolate, they intensify sound, they remove ordinary visual reference, they create anticipation and bodily strain before the deepest chambers are even reached. Add rhythmic movement, flickering light, painted presences on the walls, and the emotional power of group expectation, and a cave becomes more than a backdrop. It becomes a device for altering consciousness. This does not prove that every decorated cave was a trance chamber, or that every artist was a ritual specialist. Such claims go beyond the evidence, but it does make it plausible that some cave experiences were designed to move participants beyond ordinary perception. In that sense, the cave is not simply a place where reality looks strange. It becomes a place where reality is deliberately destabilized. Certain images support this possibility, though always indirectly. Composite figures, masked beings, and distorted bodies suggest transformation rather than static identity. The famous figure often called the sorcerer Les Trois Frères, though difficult and debated, has long attracted interpretations involving performance, disguise, or altered being. Some scholars caution that the drawing itself may exaggerate features from the original image or combine separate elements. The warning is worth keeping in mind. Even so, the broader Paleolithic record contains enough ambiguity, hybridity, and bodily transformation to suggest that people were fascinated by crossing categories. In later societies, ritual specialists often achieve authority precisely by becoming other than ordinary human during performance through costume, voice, posture, animal affiliation, or visionary journey. It would be surprising if prehistoric minds, already so alive to dreams and doubles, never moved in similar directions. A lesser known but telling clue lies in portable objects and bodily adornment: beads, pendants, teeth, claws, pigments, carved figures, and unusual materials appear across wide stretches of prehistory. Some certainly signal status, identity, exchange, or aesthetic preference. But adornment can also alter the body into a social and symbolic instrument. To wear claws is to borrow from the animal. To paint the skin is to turn the body into a sign. To carry a rare object is to move with a visible concentration of meaning. A ritual specialist might therefore be marked not by one dramatic artifact alone, but by a cumulative manipulation of appearance. The body becomes a threshold object just as the cave wall did. One sees a human being and something more than a human being at the same time. This is important because the first questioning of reality is not only about whether the world is trustworthy, it is also about whether the self is stable. A ritual specialist dramatizes that instability. In trance or performance, the person becomes vessel, messenger, healer, ancestor medium, animal double, or guide. Again, the exact categories would have differed enormously across societies, and for prehistory they remain mostly unrecoverable. But the social form is easier to recognize. Certain individuals become licensed to cross boundaries, others approach more carefully. They descend into the dark, handle the dead, interpret dreams, oversee initiations, or embody powers larger than themselves. They do for the group what the mind has already begun doing inwardly: move between ordinary and extraordinary versions of reality. There is also a political dimension, though in small-scale societies it may have looked less like formal power than like moral and emotional leverage. Whoever controls the interpretation of uncertainty holds a kind of influence. If a storm, illness, hunting failure, or strange dream requires explanation, the one who names its meaning shapes the group's next action. This does not mean ritual specialists simply invented authority for personal gain. In many societies, such roles are burdensome, dangerous, or socially constrained. But it does mean that the question of reality quickly becomes inseparable from social organization. Humans do not only wonder what is real, they also decide who gets to say. That is a turning point with a very long future. The body of the specialist may have helped make the claim credible. Trembling, chanting, exhaustion, altered breathing, tears, collapse, stillness, or apparent insensitivity to pain can all appear as signs that the person has crossed beyond ordinary awareness. Even in modern settings, people are strongly affected by bodies that visibly move outside the norm. In prehistory, where so much depended on embodied presence rather than written doctrine, such displays could have been even more persuasive. A person emerges from darkness shaken, marked in pigment, carrying an interpretation of what was encountered there. The content matters, but so does the transformation of the messenger. The group sees that something has happened. Experience becomes public through the body. At the same time, communities likely developed ways to discipline these experiences, not merely celebrate them. Not every vision can be accepted. Not every dream becomes law. Ritual systems often exist to control access to the extraordinary, to shape when, how, and by whom altered states are entered. That social regulation matters because it shows early humans were not simply overwhelmed by instability. They were trying to manage it. A specialist is useful precisely because not everyone can or should cross every threshold. The unseen must be approached in ordered ways, or it becomes dangerous. This is how ritual begins to function not just as expression, but as technology and organized method for handling uncertain realities. From here, much of a later human history becomes easier to understand. Priests, prophets, seers, healers, initiators, diviners, philosophers, and scientists all inherit, in very different forms, the same old human need. Someone must confront what is not yet understood and return with a framework the group can live inside. The prehistoric ritual specialist is not identical to any of these later figures, but there is a family resemblance. Each stands at the edge of the known. Each claims some method of crossing beyond appearances. Each asks others to trust that what is not directly visible may nevertheless be real. So the threshold is no longer merely environmental or psychological. It becomes social. Some humans are now expected to move between layers of reality on behalf of others. That expectation changes everything. It gives instability a human face. It turns private disorientation into public structure. It transforms strange experiences into shared knowledge, even when that knowledge remains symbolic, provisional, or contested. What began as dreams, echoes, shadows, and graves now acquire specialists, gestures, and procedures. The species is building institutions, small, fragile, unwritten institutions. But institutions nonetheless surround the fact that reality does not seem singular, and yet institutions alone are not enough. To hold a layered world together, humans need repeated forms that outlast any one vision or one specialist. They need marks, objects, stories, and actions that can be revisited when certainty fails. Out of that need comes one of the most consequential developments in all of human history, the building of symbolic systems strong enough to organize chaos itself. Once a species begins to suspect that reality is layered, unstable, and only partly visible, it cannot live by spontaneous intuition alone. Strange experiences accumulate too quickly. Dreams disturb the dead. Illness arrives without obvious cause. Weather changes patterns without warning. Caves and rituals alter perception. Certain people claim contact with forces others do not clearly see. Without some durable system for sorting these things, human life becomes mentally unmanageable. The answer is not certainty. It is symbol. Symbols do what direct perception cannot. They gather scattered meanings into forms that can be repeated, remembered, shared, and trusted, at least enough for a group to keep going. They do not eliminate the chaos of the world. They build pathways through it. This is one of the most important transformations in the human story. A symbol is more than a sign. A track in mud points to an animal because the animal passed there. A symbol, by contrast, carries meaning by shared recognition, by association, by emotional and social force. It can stand in for something absent, invisible, or too large to grasp directly. A marked stone may not simply be a stone. A pattern repeated on skin may not simply be decoration. A carved figure may not simply resemble. It may contain. It may connect. It may warn. Once symbols become socially active in this way, humans no longer face uncertainty with naked perception alone. They face it with constructed realities, systems of marks, gestures, colours, objects, and repeated acts that help hold the unseen in place. That development is not abstract. It likely begins in practical pressures. A migrating group needs memory beyond one individual's lifespan. A burial needs to distinguish this death from ordinary disappearance. A dangerous place needs to be remembered and recognized. Kinship needs visible reinforcement. A ritual must be done the same way next season as it was done last season. Under those conditions, symbols become survival tools. They stabilize collective understanding. Red pigment can recur with enough consistency to feel charged. Certain animals can become more than prey. Certain paths can be marked as forbidden or potent. Repeated bodily adornment can signal belonging, maturity, grief, or authority. The visible world fills with signs whose importance cannot be reduced to immediate physical function. This is where humans begin to build shared realities strong enough to outlast any one mind. A dream may be private, but a repeated symbol is public. A trance may be difficult to verify, but a ritual object can be handled by all. A grief may be personal, but a burial posture or pigment use can give it communal form. In this sense, symbolic systems do not emerge because ancient people were especially irrational. They emerge because human communities need durable ways to coordinate around things that are emotionally undeniable but empirically unstable. The dead matter, but how the season changes, but why here and now. A place feels dangerous, but what should be done? Symbols allow these pressures to be organized without being fully solved. One of the most striking aspects of prehistory is how often repeated forms appear across wide time spans without becoming fully transparent to us. Dots, lines, chevrons, hand stencils, abstract signs, engraved patterns on ochre, repeated body ornament, selected animal teeth, shells carried far inland, beads arranged in sequences, objects placed with the dead. Each of these gestures suggests that humans were operating in symbolic fields far richer than the surviving evidence can fully decode. Scholars still debate the meaning of many such materials, and often the evidence remains incomplete. That uncertainty should be acknowledged plainly, yet the persistence of repetition itself is revealing. People return to certain forms because those forms do work. They help transform raw experience into shared orientation. They are mental anchors placed in a world that otherwise shifts too easily. This may be why ornaments matter so much. To modern eyes, a bead can seem minor, decorative, almost trivial beside the drama of cave paintings or burials. In prehistory, ornament may have been one of the most powerful symbolic technologies available. A string of shells, pierced teeth, or carved beads is portable identity. It makes social reality visible on the body. It tells others who belongs, who has status, who is initiated, who mourns, who perhaps carries special authority. More than that, it turns the body itself into a surface of meaning, much as the cave wall had become. The person is no longer only a biological being moving through the world. The person is a sign-bearing being. Reality now includes appearances intentionally shaped to communicate invisible truths. The same is true of repeated action. A ritual may look simple from outside: a posture, a chant, a sequence of movements, a handling of objects, a route taken into or around a place. But repetition gives action symbolic density. The act no longer belongs only to the present moment. It carries every previous performance inside it. This is how humans begin to build time into behavior. The same gesture done again is never merely the same gesture. It summons memory, authority, and continuity. If the world feels uncertain, repetition reassures by creating patterned order. It says that not everything changes, or at least, if everything changes, some forms can be carried through change. That psychological function is enormous. It allows human groups to endure realities they cannot control by embedding themselves in practices they can. There is also a deeper cognitive effect. Symbols do not merely organize experience after the fact, they shape what can be perceived in the first place. Once a community agrees that a certain mark, color, animal, or place carries specific significance, members begin to notice the world through that framework. A bird crossing at a certain time may become meaningful because the symbolic field is already there to receive it. A dream of a particular animal may gain force because the animal already belongs to a charged network of associations. In this way, symbolic systems do not simply reflect reality. They help produce the reality humans inhabit socially and emotionally. No single explanation fully accounts for the rise of such systems, but their power lies partly in this feedback loop. Humans make symbols, and symbols then make worlds. That may sound like a later philosophical insight, yet its roots are very old. A child born into a symbolic community does not encounter the world as raw data. The child encounters a world already divided into meaningful and meaningless, pure and dangerous, living and dead, us and them, ordinary and charged. Stones are not just stones if one was placed in a burial. Animals are not just animals if one kind belongs to a recurring ritual image. Certain words, gestures, pigments, and objects gather force because generations have invested them with it. Over time, the symbolic order becomes inseparable from reality itself. People do not feel that they are imposing meaning on chaos. They feel that they are recognizing the true structure of things. This helps explain why ritual error can feel so serious in many traditional societies. If symbols are merely decorative, then using the wrong one matters little. If symbols are part of how the world stays ordered, then misuse becomes dangerous. Something similar may have been true in prehistory, even if the details are lost. A burial done incorrectly, an object placed wrongly, a forbidden mark broken. A sequence interrupted such acts could threaten not just social rules, but the fragile relationship between visible life and the unseen powers beneath it. Symbolic order becomes moral order and cosmological order at the same time. Humans are no longer just surviving the world, they are helping keep it intelligible. A surprising detail in this long development is how often abstraction appears beside vivid realism. Paleolithic art can produce stunningly lifelike animals, yet it also includes signs whose meanings remain opaque. This coexistence matters. It shows that symbolic thought is not a primitive stage left behind by realistic observation, nor is realism a mature replacement for symbolism. They grow together. Humans can render the visible with intense care while also insisting that abstract forms matter. That combination suggests a mind already comfortable holding multiple kinds of truth at once. The world is what it looks like, and more than what it looks like. A horse is a horse, and a charged presence in a larger symbolic network. Reality is becoming thick. This thickness has consequences for social cohesion. Shared symbols create trust among those who understand them and boundaries against those who do not. A pattern, object, or ritual known only to initiates can bind a subgroup within the larger community. A burial practice repeated across generations can make ancestry visible even without writing. A set of ornaments can announce alliance or distance. These are not minor additions to human life. They are the beginnings of collective imagination as infrastructure. Groups can now coordinate not only through immediate kinship and practical necessity, but through durable symbolic worlds that tell them who they are and what kind of reality they inhabit together. It is possible, too, that symbols helped contain fear by making uncertainty more legible. A storm with no explanation is terrifying in one way. A storm that belongs to a symbolic and ritual framework may still be frightening, but it becomes nameable. It has a place in the order of things. The same is true of death, fertility, illness, hunting luck, and environmental change. Symbols do not grant control in a mechanical sense. They grant orientation. For a species that has begun to realize how much lies beyond direct perception, orientation may be the closest thing to control available. This is why symbolic systems are not optional ornaments on early human life. They are part of the mental architecture that makes continued social life possible in a mysterious world. And yet symbols do something even more radical than stabilize. They prepare the way for hidden orders. Once people become accustomed to the idea that visible things point beyond themselves, it becomes easier to imagine that the entire world is structured by patterns not obvious at first glance. A mark can conceal a meaning. A ritual can unlock a passage. A recurring animal can signify more than itself. From there, the sky can become a coded surface. Seasons can become messages. Reality can begin to look organized not only by local signs, but by vast patterns beyond human making. That next turn matters because it widens the human problem. Until now, mystery has been intimate, bodily, local, buried in dreams, caves, graves, and ritual acts. Soon it will rise overhead. People will begin to notice that the heavens themselves move in ways that feel both reliable and unreachable, as if the visible world is governed by an order humans did not create and cannot ignore. Symbolic thinking has prepared them for exactly that revelation. They are ready to read the sky. At first, the sky is simply above. It is where light comes from, where darkness returns, where weather forms, where birds move and vanish. For most of human existence, it offers orientation in the most basic sense. Day and night structure activity. The rising and setting of the sun define direction. The phases of the moon change the quality of darkness, altering hunting, movement, and rest. But over long stretches of time, something else becomes impossible to ignore. The sky does not behave randomly, it repeats, it shifts, but in patterns. It carries movements so vast and so regular that even without instruments, attentive human minds begin to sense that something deeper is at work. This realization does not arrive as abstract astronomy. It grows slowly, through lived dependence on seasonal cycles. Animals migrate at certain times, plants appear, ripen, and vanish. Rivers swell and retreat. Cold returns with a rhythm that can be anticipated but not stopped. Survival depends on recognizing these cycles early enough to act. A group that misjudges the coming of winter, the movement of herds, or the return of rains risks collapse. Under such pressure, Attention to the sky becomes more than curiosity. It becomes a necessity. Over generations, people begin to notice that certain stars appear at particular times of year, that the length of day changes in predictable ways, that the moon's phases follow a sequence. What begins as practical observation slowly becomes something more unsettling. The world is governed by patterns that do not belong to human will. This is a profound shift in the experience of reality. Up to this point, much of the uncertainty humans confront is local dreams, death, caves, ritual, symbols, and social interpretation. The sky introduces a different scale. It suggests that beyond the immediate environment, beyond even the social world, there exists an order vast enough to structure time itself. The sun rises whether or not humans act. The stars return whether or not they are understood. Eclipses occur without warning, briefly destroying the ordinary certainty of day or night. To witness an eclipse without prior explanation is to see the most stable part of reality suddenly fail. The sun disappears. The world darkens at the wrong hour. Animals react. The body responds with alarm. Then, just as suddenly, the light returns. No single explanation fully accounts for how prehistoric humans interpreted such events, but it is difficult to imagine they left no mark. They are too disruptive, too total. They reveal that even the most reliable features of reality can break. The regularity of the sky, combined with its occasional disruptions, creates a powerful tension. On one hand, it offers the possibility of prediction. On the other, it reminds humans that prediction is never complete. This tension may have been one of the earliest drivers of systematic observation. To survive, people must learn the rhythms. To feel secure, they must believe the rhythms will hold. Yet anomalies, unexpected weather, irregular animal behavior, rare celestial events prevent that belief from becoming absolute. Reality becomes structured, but not guaranteed. It is ordered, but not controlled. This is a different kind of uncertainty from the one found in dreams or caves. It is colder, more distant, less emotional, but perhaps even more powerful. It suggests that the world has rules, but those rules do not belong to humans. Over time, the sky likely becomes one of the first large-scale symbolic surfaces. Just as a cave wall can hold animals and signs, the heavens can hold patterns that invite interpretation. Stars form shapes, or at least appear to. Certain groupings become recognizable, remembered, named in ways now lost or transformed beyond recovery. The evidence remains incomplete for the earlier stages of this process, but later traditions across the world preserve a striking consistency. Humans almost everywhere eventually map stories onto the sky. This does not mean those stories began all at once or in identical forms. It means that once the mind becomes accustomed to reading signs in stone, in ritual, in dream, it is ready to read signs in the heavens as well. The sky becomes not just background, but message. There is something deeply unsettling about that development. If the sky can be read, then reality is not only layered but encoded. It contains information that must be interpreted. A star rising at a certain time may signal a season. A pattern of light may indicate a cycle. A sudden darkening may demand explanation. Human beings, already skilled at finding meaning behind appearances, extend that skill upward. The entire visible world begins to look like a surface behind which something else operates. The question of reality expands. It is no longer only about whether the senses deceive or whether the dead persist. It is about whether the structure of existence itself is visible or hidden. This may be one reason early humans become increasingly sensitive to alignment, direction, and repetition in space. Even before monumental architecture, there are hints of spatial awareness tied to celestial observation. Sites may be revisited at certain times. Movement through landscapes may follow seasonal logic tied to sky patterns. Much later, in Neolithic and Bronze Age contexts, this awareness becomes far more explicit, with structures aligned to solstices, equinoxes, or particular celestial events, but the roots likely lie much earlier, in the simple but transformative act of noticing that the sky moves in ways that can be tracked. Tracking requires memory, and memory requires structure. This is where symbolic systems and sky observation begin to merge. A star pattern can be remembered more easily if it is linked to a story. A seasonal shift can be predicted more reliably if it is tied to a recurring sign. Over time, the sky becomes part of the same symbolic network that already includes animals, places, rituals, and the dead. It is not separate from human meaning. It becomes one of its largest expressions. What survives in the record suggests that by the time we reach later prehistoric periods, this integration is already well underway. But its origins likely stretch back into much earlier, quieter acts of watching. There is also the question of scale. The sky is both near and unreachable. It dominates vision yet resists touch. Unlike a cave wall or a carved object, it cannot be entered or altered. This gives it a special authority. If patterns appear there, they seem less contingent on human action. They belong to a reality beyond immediate manipulation. For a species that has learned to create images and symbols, this is a crucial contrast. Humans can make representations, but the sky presents representations that no human has made. That difference may have encouraged the sense that some orders are given rather than constructed. The visible world divides again what humans shape and what humans discover. At the same time, the sky does not remain entirely beyond human engagement. Through observation, naming, and ritual, people begin to interact with it symbolically. A rising star may be greeted, a seasonal turning may be marked with action, an eclipse may provoke collective response. These are not acts of control in the mechanical sense, but they are acts of relationship. Humans position themselves in relation to a larger pattern. They respond, anticipate, interpret. In doing so, they extend the same cognitive habits that once read tracks in mud or faces in shadow. The difference is that the field of interpretation has expanded to include the entire visible cosmos. One lesser known but intriguing possibility is that the sky's predictability may have reinforced belief in hidden order, precisely because it contrasts so strongly with the unpredictability of daily life. Weather can fail expectations, animals can vanish, illness can strike without warning, but the sun rises, the moon cycles, certain stars return. In a world otherwise filled with uncertainty, these reliable patterns stand out. They suggest that beneath chaos there is structure. That suggestion is powerful. It invites explanation. It encourages the idea that reality is governed by something consistent, even if that something remains unseen. And yet, the sky never allows that belief to become complete. Eclipses disrupt it. Comets appear unexpectedly. Meteor showers break the stillness. Rare conjunctions alter familiar patterns. Even the slow shifting of stars over generations would eventually become noticeable to attentive observers, though the timescale is long. These anomalies remind humans that even the most stable layer of reality can change. The result is not simple confidence or simple doubt, but a complex relationship to the world. Reality is ordered, but that order is not transparent. It must be read, remembered, and perhaps never fully grasped. This realization deepens the earlier fracture. The visible world is no longer just a surface hiding local meanings. It is part of a vast system that extends beyond immediate experience. Humans live inside patterns they did not create and cannot fully perceive. They can detect pieces, anticipate some cycles, respond to certain events, but the whole remains out of reach. This creates a new kind of intellectual tension. If there is order, where does it come from? If patterns repeat, what governs them if anomalies occur? What disrupts them? These questions may not yet be formalized, but the conditions for them are now firmly in place. From here, the next transformation is inevitable. Once the sky is read, once patterns are tracked, once symbols organize experience and specialists interpret the unseen, humans begin to weave these elements together into something larger. Stories emerge that attempt to explain not just isolated events, but the structure of reality itself. The world is no longer only lived, it is narrated, and those narratives will become some of the first maps humans create not of land, but of existence. Long before philosophy asks what is real, myth begins answering the question in narrative form, not because myth is childish or careless, but because it is one of the earliest human tools capable of holding many truths at once. A storm can be both weather and intention. A cave can be both rock and threshold. The dead can be both gone and present. The sky can be both visible pattern and hidden law. Myth does not struggle against these doublenesses the way later analytic thought often does. It absorbs them. It gives them shape, sequence, agency, and memory. In doing so, it becomes one of humanity's first serious maps of reality. This is a crucial shift. Symbols help organize uncertain experience, but myths connect symbols into systems. A repeated animal motif may carry force on its own. A burial gesture may matter deeply in a given moment. A celestial cycle may be observed with growing respect. But once these elements are woven into story, they begin to explain one another. The animal is no longer only powerful, it belongs to origins, ancestors, seasons, or transformations. The burial is no longer only an act of care. It becomes part of a larger relationship between the living, the dead, and the world beneath. The sky is no longer only patterned, it is inhabited, ordered, or enacted by beings whose actions make sense of recurrence and disruption. Myth turns scattered signs into a reality model. That model is not primitive science in a crude sense, nor is it mere fantasy detached from observation. It emerges from accumulated human encounters with a world that already feels layered and unstable. Dreams bring back the absent. Echoes suggest answering voices. Caves alter perception. Ritual specialists cross into strange states. The sky reveals order beyond human making. In such a world, a flat account of reality is not enough. Myth becomes necessary because reality itself appears to require more than surface description. It must include causes that are not visible, powers that move through ordinary events, and histories that explain why the world appears one way while being governed by deeper patterns. This is why myth so often begins near thresholds. Origins happen in darkness, in waters, in caves, in underworlds, in sky realms, in first times when categories have not yet hardened. Humans across many later traditions imagine reality as emerging from a condition unlike ordinary daylight existence. That recurrence should not be projected backward without caution, and the evidence remains incomplete for prehistoric narrative systems. But the logic is deeply ancient. If ordinary perception is already understood as partial, then the beginning of things cannot be expected to look like the present world. Myth answers this by placing ultimate causes in a realm adjacent to, beneath, above, or before ordinary reality. It tells humans that the visible world is the surface expression of a deeper story. One of myth's greatest powers is that it makes invisible order memorable. A sequence of events can be told, repeated, adapted, taught to children, reenacted in ritual, embedded in place names, and linked to seasonal movements. This matters because raw metaphysical insight is hard to preserve. A story, by contrast, can travel. It can carry practical knowledge, social rules, cosmological assumptions, and emotional truth at the same time. A narrative about a sky being who withdraws light, a first burial that establishes the separation of living and dead, or an ancestral animal that teaches humans how to move between worlds can preserve a worldview without ever reducing it to abstract doctrine. Myth is therefore not just explanation, it is memory technology for realities that cannot be directly demonstrated. This is also why myth often resists modern categories. It does not separate natural process from social meaning, or psychology from cosmology, in the way later thought tends to do. In a mythic frame, an eclipse can be a celestial event and a dangerous crisis in the order of things at the same time. A drought can be environmental stress and broken relationship. A cave painting can be image and presence. A dream can be mental experience and communication. To a modern observer, this may seem like confusion. In fact, it may reflect an older and more flexible recognition. Human beings never encounter reality as raw mechanism alone. They encounter it through bodies, relationships, fear, memory, expectation, and symbolic worlds already in place. Myth does not deny that complexity, it formalizes it. There is a dry truth hidden in many ancient stories. There are often attempts to explain why appearance and reality do not match. Why does death occur if the world contains continuity? Why do humans suffer if there is order? Why do seasons change if the land seems stable? Why do dreams feel true while vanishing at dawn? Why do some places seem more real than others? Myth approaches these contradictions narratively. It does not say simply that the senses deceive. It says that the world is what it is because of prior events, hidden agencies, or broken original conditions. In other words, myth gives reasons for reality's instability. The world feels incomplete because, in mythic terms, it is incomplete fallen from an earlier order, divided by a primordial act, suspended between forces, or maintained through ritual renewal. Scholars still debate how far back full mythic systems can be inferred. Stories rarely fossilize. Oral traditions can survive for astonishing spans of time in transformed form, but proving continuity across deep prehistory is difficult. Yet there are clues, repeated symbolic motifs, enduring concern with thresholds, the ritual importance of ancestors, composite beings, sacred landscapes, and patterned celestial attention all suggest that by the later stages of prehistory, many communities likely possessed dense narrative frameworks for understanding reality. What those stories were in exact words is lost. What survives in the record suggests their underlying function. They joined experience to order. Place is central here. Myth does not usually float free of geography. It attaches itself to caves, rivers, hills, springs, stones, migration paths, burial grounds, and horizons. That attachment gives story physical depth. A landscape becomes legible not only through practical memory, but through narrative presence. This is where the natural world begins to feel truly inhabited. A cliff is not just a cliff if it is where beings emerged, where ancestors paused, where the dead pass, where thunder answers, or where a boundary between worlds remains thin. Once such stories settle into land, reality is no longer evenly distributed. Some places become denser than others. Some hold more truth, more danger, more access. Myth therefore reshapes perception spatially. It teaches people where reality presses closest to its hidden foundations. There is another important consequence. Myth allows communities to live inside uncertainty without requiring permanent doubt. A purely unstable world is psychologically exhausting. A purely fixed world is contradicted by experience. Myth offers something between them. It acknowledges that the world contains hidden forces, change, contradiction, and rupture, but it places them within a larger intelligible pattern. Storms happen, but not meaninglessly. Death occurs, but not outside order. Dreams disturb the sleeper, but belong to a wider traffic between realms. This does not eliminate fear, it makes fear habitable. For early humans, that may have been one of myth's greatest achievements. A surprising and revealing feature of mythic thinking is how often it treats language itself as causally powerful. Names matter, spoken formulae matter, repeated sequences matter. This tendency becomes clearer in later recorded traditions, but its roots may stretch back into prehistory, a species that has already learned that symbols shape reality and that ritual order stabilizes uncertainty is likely to treat speech as more than description. Words can summon memory, bind groups, frame perception, and alter emotional states. In mythic reality, language does not merely report the world, it helps sustain the world. That idea will echo far into later religion and philosophy, where speech, logos, law, and creation remain entangled. At the same time, myths are never fully settled. They shift in retelling, absorb new experiences, and coexist with rival versions. This is important because reality itself is still not fully resolved. Different groups, different lineages, different ritual specialists may interpret the same events differently. One story emphasizes the dead, another the sky, another the animal world, another the landscape. Myth does not end debate. It gives debate a durable arena. Competing explanations can survive side by side because each is carried in narrative form, attached to practice, memory, and authority. In that sense, myth is already a field of interpretation, not a final solution. This means that by the time myth becomes a major human instrument, the question of reality has matured significantly. Humans are no longer only reacting to strange experiences as isolated shocks. They are embedding those shocks in explanatory worlds. They are building accounts of existence that can absorb dream, death, image, symbol, sky, and ritual into a coherent, if never fully fixed whole. That coherence is powerful. It lets societies endure. It lets knowledge travel. It lets children inherit a world already interpreted. Yet it also creates a new tension, because once a narrative explanation exists, it can be compared with other experiences and other explanations. The very act of systematizing reality prepares the ground for conflict within reality. And conflict will come. Dreams may say one thing, ritual another. Ancestors may be honored, but crops may still fail. The sky may appear orderly, yet eclipses and storms interrupt it. A specialist may return from trance with one interpretation, while another group preserves a different story. Myth organizes reality, but it cannot make all versions align perfectly. In trying to hold the world together, it also reveals where the world refuses to stay neatly held. That refusal matters. It will create the first serious cracks in certainty. Even within symbolic and mythic worlds, humans have now built structures strong enough to live inside. Soon they will discover that those structures, too, leave contradictions exposed. The first great human stories do not remove uncertainty. They make it bearable. But over time, even the strongest symbolic worlds begin to show strain. A dream says one thing, a ritual specialist another, a burial promises continuity, yet the body still decays. The sky moves with magnificent regularity, yet storms ruin crops, eclipses terrify, and rare events arrive without warning. A sacred place feels charged and alive, yet those who visit it still fall ill, still age, still die. Myth can connect these contradictions into narrative, but it cannot erase them. The world continues to produce experiences that do not fit cleanly into any single frame. This may be one of the oldest pressures pushing human beings beyond simple acceptance. Once reality has been organized symbolically, its failures become easier to notice. That is the paradox. The more successfully a culture explains the world, the more visible unexplained things become. Before shared symbols and myths, uncertainty is raw and scattered. After them, uncertainty becomes patterned enough to provoke deeper tension. If the dead remain active in some way, why do they seem near in dreams but silent in other moments of desperate need? If rituals maintain order, why do they sometimes fail if the sky reveals hidden law? Why does that law allow catastrophe? If certain people can cross thresholds of reality, why do their visions differ? No single explanation fully accounts for how prehistoric communities handled these contradictions, and the evidence remains incomplete. But what survives in the record suggests that early humanity did not live in seamless confidence. It lived inside frameworks repeatedly tested by experience. This testing likely begins in the most ordinary and painful parts of life. Illness is one of the clearest examples. A wound can be seen, cleaned, bound. A fever cannot. A strong person weakens for no visible reason. A child survives one sickness and dies of another. Herbs may help sometimes and fail other times. A community can interpret illness symbolically, socially, spiritually, or ritually. But the body keeps producing outcomes that resist neat consistency. That inconsistency matters. It teaches that explanation and control are not the same thing. One may know what a sickness means within the symbolic world and still be helpless before it. The visible body becomes a site where reality refuses perfect interpretation. Weather creates a similar problem on a larger scale. Human groups may learn patterns, respect seasonal timing, and align their lives with recurring cycles, yet a single drought, flood, cold snap, or a failed migration can break expectation. In a world structured by meaning, such disruptions are not only material losses, they're assaults on intelligibility. Why here? Why now? Why, despite the right, the memory, the care, the inherited rule? The question is not merely practical, it is ontological. What sort of world behaves regularly enough to invite trust but irregularly enough to shatter it? A purely chaotic world would be easier in one bleak sense. One would expect nothing, but humans do expect. Their minds are built to expect patterns, and their symbolic systems deepen that expectation. Every rupture therefore cuts twice, once into survival, and once into the idea that reality can be known. Death, once again, remains the sharpest contradiction of all. Burial, ancestor practice, memory, and dream may all give structure to the dead, but none restore them. The face goes still. The voice disappears from daylight. Bones endure, then fragment. Even in communities where death is richly ritualized, grief returns with stubborn force because ritual does not eliminate loss. This does not make ritual false, it makes reality resistant. The dead seem present in one register and absent in another. Human beings must live with both facts at once. That tension is perhaps the oldest school of metaphysical seriousness. It teaches that appearance and meaning may both be real, yet not easily reconciled. There may also have been conflicts between kinds of knowledge. An experienced tracker knows one sort of reality, a healer knows another. An elder carries remembered events that younger members did not witness. A ritual specialist interprets visions inaccessible to others. A talented hunter trusts skill and timing. A mourner trusts dreams. A sky watcher trusts cycles. A mother trusts bodily intuition. These are not modern disciplines, but they are different ways of knowing. In small communities, they likely overlap heavily, yet overlap does not prevent tension. One explanation of an event may compete with another. One person's sign is another's coincidence. One group may preserve a story that another rejects. Human beings do not only question reality when they doubt the world, they question it when realities collide within the same social space. This collision may be one reason ritual becomes so repetitive and conservative. Repetition is often treated as mindless tradition from a modern distance. But in unstable worlds, repetition is a discipline against doubt. To do the right again is to say that the order still holds, or must be made to hold. Yet repetition also reveals anxiety. People repeat because outcomes are uncertain. They preserve formulas because forgetting feels dangerous. In this sense, ritual conservatism may be less a sign of certainty than a sign of reality under strain. The world keeps slipping. Human beings keep rebuilding the bridge. A revealing clue lies in how many later traditional societies preserve not only stories of order, but stories of broken order. Something once fit together, and now does not. Death entered. The seasons changed. Humans lost an earlier way of speaking with animals, ancestors, or powers. A golden age ended. A boundary was crossed. A rule was broken. These narratives are younger than the prehistoric moments that concern us, and they cannot be projected backward in simple form. Yet their recurrence suggests something fundamental. Human beings repeatedly experience the world as though reality itself has a damaged quality. It is lawful, but wounded, structured, but fractured. That intuition may have roots far earlier than written myth, in the cumulative memory of living amid patterns that never become fully dependable. This is where the first cracks in certainty become more than episodic. They become structural. The issue is no longer just that strange things happen. The issue is that no explanatory system fully contains all strange things at once. A dream may comfort, but a famine still comes. A ritual may be precise, but a child still dies. An ancestor may be honored, but conflict still divides the living. The sky may be regular, but the earth below remains difficult. Such experiences do not necessarily destroy belief. More often they complicate it. They force humans to hold multiple layers of interpretation together, even when those layers do not perfectly agree. This is a more mature form of questioning reality. It is not disbelief, it is sustained tension. One surprising possibility is that this tension may have sharpened human introspection. If external frameworks do not always settle the matter, attention turns inward. What did I really see? Was that dream a message, or only grief? Did the sign occur outside me or inside me? Is fear revealing something real or creating it? These questions do not need formal philosophical vocabulary to exist. They arise naturally when experience becomes difficult to classify. The human mind, already capable of memory, projection, and symbolic thought, begins to watch itself more closely. Reality is not only out there to be interpreted, it is also in here, filtered through a perceiving and unstable self. This inward turn is subtle but transformative. It prepares the ground for later reflections on illusion, appearance, truth, and the reliability of the senses. Before anyone writes arguments about knowledge, humans have already endured situations where sensation and meaning diverge. The cave wall seemed to move, the dead seemed present, the sky seemed stable until it broke, the ritual felt right, yet the outcome failed. The sign seemed obvious to one person and invisible to another. Over and over, the species encounters the same disturbing lesson experiences, compelling, but not final. What feels true may not be simply true. What seems obvious may depend on the frame one inhabits. There is also a social consequence to this uncertainty. If no framework resolves everything, authority becomes fragile. Specialists may still matter, elders may still guide, rituals may still bind, but confidence is no longer effortless. Trust must be maintained. Explanations must be renewed. Symbols must be carried forward with enough strength to survive contradiction. This makes human culture both resilient and vulnerable. It can absorb enormous ambiguity. Yet it is always at risk of fracture when ambiguity becomes too great. The first human questioning of reality, therefore, has political implications long before formal politics. It shapes who is believed, what is remembered, which places remain sacred, which stories are repeated, and how communities respond when the world resists them. What survives in the record suggests not a straight path from confidence to doubt, but a long coexistence between them. Humans trust and question at once. They live through symbol while recognizing its limits. They rely on ritual while encountering failure. They honor the dead while feeling their absence. They watch the heavens and still fear surprise. This coexistence may be one of the defining features of the species. It is not a temporary stage on the way to later rationality. It is a permanent condition of minds trying to inhabit a world richer, stranger, and less transparent than immediate perception can ever fully capture. By now the old certainty of simple appearance is gone. Reality is too layered for that. Yet the new symbolic and mythic frameworks have not produced final peace. They have, in a sense, made the problem more visible. Humans know more, organize more, remember more, and therefore notice more clearly what they still cannot resolve. The result is not despair, it is pressure, the kind of pressure that eventually pushes thought in a new direction. If myth can map hidden order, perhaps reflection can analyze it. If symbols can hold contradictions, perhaps language can begin to separate them. If rituals mediate between realities, perhaps the mind itself can become an object of inquiry. That transition will not happen all at once, and it will not erase the old worlds. Myth, ritual, and sacred landscape will remain powerful for millennia, but something new is gathering beneath them, the possibility that humans can step back not only from appearances, but from their own inherited explanations. The first cracks in certainty do not destroy the ancient map. They reveal that it is a map, and once that realization appears, the road opens toward a more explicit, more dangerous question. If the world has been interpreted all along, what, exactly is interpretation hiding? The next shift is quieter than burial, less visible than cave art, less dramatic than eclipse or storm, but in the long run it may be even more consequential. Humans begin not only to endure strange experiences, but to compare them. They begin to notice that one kind of truth belongs to ritual, another to memory, another to the body, another to the sky, another to the private force of dreams. They begin to feel, perhaps dimly at first, that reality is not just mysterious. It is internally divided. One thing is seen, another believed. One thing is inherited, another felt directly. One explanation orders the group, another rises uninvited in the mind. This is the moment when uncertainty starts turning inward with greater intensity. The problem is no longer only what the world is, it is how humans know what the world is. That distinction marks a deepening of consciousness. Earlier, the species learned that appearances can mislead. Firelight changes walls, water doubles the self, dreams produce impossible yet convincing journeys. The dead remain present in memory while absent in body. Symbols and myths help hold these contradictions in place. But over time, another question emerges beneath them all. Why do different experiences of reality conflict? Why does the body insist on one thing while ritual insists on another? Why does grief make the dead feel near when daylight denies them? Why does a vision compel one person and leave another unconvinced? The evidence remains incomplete, as it must for worlds without writing. But what survives in the broader arc of human development suggests that some people began to dwell more deliberately in this tension. They did not merely inherit explanations, they weighed them against experience. That weighing does not yet look like formal philosophy. It is more bodily, more embedded in ordinary life, and more dangerous because it has no clear language to protect it. A hunter misses what should have been an easy shot and begins to suspect that ritual purity, not skill, was decisive. Another sees the same event and thinks the wind shifted. A mourner dreams vividly of the dead and feels certainty, while another member of the group, no less respectful, remains unsure what dreams prove. A ritual specialist declares a sign significant. An elder recalls a similar sign before and remembers that nothing came of it. Such moments may have been brief, rarely stated openly, perhaps even socially risky. Yet they matter because they teach the human mind to compare frameworks rather than simply move within one of them. This comparison is a major step toward reflective thought. Once people begin to notice that explanations themselves can be judged, a new kind of inner distance appears. The mind stands not only at a distance from the world, but at a distance from its own inherited ways of making sense of the world. It asks, in however inarticulate a form, whether what feels true is always true, whether what the group affirms must be real, whether repeated action guarantees correct understanding. That is not disbelief in the modern sense. It is something more ancient and more fragile, the dawning recognition that the mind can examine the very tools by which it lives. There are several pressures that may have pushed humans toward this threshold. One is repetition without resolution. A ritual is performed, then performed again. Because certainty fades, the very need for repetition may invite thought. If order holds, why must it constantly be renewed? Another pressure is disagreement. Human communities are cooperative, but they are not mentally uniform. Different generations remember differently. Different individuals are more susceptible to dreams, fear, symbolic intensity, skepticism, or bodily intuition. Over time, No single reality model can remain perfectly frictionless. A third pressure is environmental complexity. As societies become denser, more settled, or more exposed to exchange with other groups, competing customs and explanations come into contact. What one group regards as obvious, another may treat as strange. Such encounters are deeply destabilizing. They reveal that even sacred interpretations are not universal. This may be one of the lesser-known engines of humanity's deeper questioning of reality pluralism before philosophy. Even without formal schools of thought, people notice that other people do not live inside the same symbolic world in exactly the same way. One burial tradition differs from another. One sacred animal is not another group's sacred animal. One sky story is not another sky story. One healer's method fails where another's succeeds. Such differences do not automatically produce tolerance or abstraction. Often they produce conflict. But they also expose a remarkable fact. If realities differ across groups, then perhaps some part of what humans take to be the structure of the world is also a structure of the mind, of memory, of culture. That insight need not be explicit to be powerful. It only has to be felt. Time itself sharpens the problem. Human beings increasingly remember not just events, but changes in explanation. An elder can say that things were done differently once. A burial place may contain older and newer patterns. A sacred story may acquire a second version. A place once avoided may later be approached in ritual. The world does not just contain hidden layers. It contains historical layers of interpretation. This is profoundly unsettling. It suggests that reality, as humans inhabit it, has a history. It has been shaped, revised, contested. What seems eternal may in fact be inherited. What seems obvious may once have been strange. In that realization lies one of the earlier seeds of intellectual freedom and one of the earlier sources of existential unease. The body plays a role here as well. Bodily states continue to challenge every explanation. Fatigue distorts perception. Fear manufactures certainty. Hunger narrows attention. Desire misreads signs. Fever produces worlds that vanish with the fever itself. A trance may feel more real than ordinary waking life, yet it ends. A dream can transform the day, then fade by evening. These experiences teach a severe lesson. Certainty is often tied to condition. A person in grief knows one world. A person in health knows another. A person in darkness knows another still. What survives in the long human record suggests that people repeatedly grappled with this instability, even when they did not possess later concepts like subjectivity or cognition. They knew, in lived form, that the state of the perceiver changes the shape of the perceived. That is one of the most dangerous discoveries a mind can make. It means that reality may not only be hidden, it may be filtered. If so, then every ritual, every dream, every myth, every fear, every vision, every omen is vulnerable to a further question. Is this revealing something beyond me, or revealing the condition of my own mind? Scholars still debate how early such distinctions can meaningfully be traced, and caution is appropriate. But no single explanation fully accounts for humanity's eventual philosophical turn without acknowledging a long prehistory of felt epistemic tension. The species had already spent tens of thousands of years encountering the difference between experience and certainty. It is possible that certain ritual specialists themselves helped push this awareness forward. A person who enters altered states repeatedly may become more, not less, attentive to the difference between ordinary and extraordinary perception. They may notice what conditions bring visions, What settings intensify presence? What bodily preparations alter experience? That knowledge can remain ritualized, but it also contains the beginnings of method. The specialist learns that reality can be approached through procedures that shape the mind. This is not science, but it is not naive immersion either. It is a disciplined exploration of consciousness. And once consciousness becomes something that can be modulated, examined, and compared, reality is no longer simply out there. It is entangled with the instrument of perception itself. Myth, at this stage, does not disappear. It becomes more subtle. It continues to organize the world, but it also begins to coexist with reflection about the world's organization. A sacred story may still be true in a communal sense while an individual privately wonders how its truth operates. A ritual may still bind a group even when participants experience it differently. A burial may still matter, even if what exactly continues after death remains uncertain. This coexistence is important. The move toward thought is not a clean break from older symbolic life. It grows inside it, feeds on its contradictions, and carries many of its assumptions forward in altered form. One surprising detail in later ancient traditions is how often the earliest explicit thinkers emerge from worlds already saturated with ritual, myth, and inherited sacred forms. They do not invent questioning from nothing. They inherit centuries or millennia of unresolved tension, the distinction between appearance and reality, waking and dream, body and whatever leaves the body, order and disruption, visible and invisible. These are far older than philosophy. Formal thought is a late sharpening of a prehistoric unease. Long before arguments are written down, humans are already living in ways that prepare them to ask whether the senses are reliable, whether tradition is enough, and whether truth may lie behind ordinary experience rather than within it. This is why the first time humans question reality cannot be reduced to one breakthrough. It is a staircase of deepening distance. First, they notice hidden causes behind visible events. Then they feel the split between waking and dream, life and death, image and thing. Then they build symbolic systems and myths to stabilize those splits. Then those systems reveal their own limits. By the time more explicit reflection begins to stir, the species is already deeply trained in ambiguity. It has become normal to live with doubles, thresholds, contradictions, and unseen orders. The only remaining step is to say more clearly what has long been felt. Perhaps the world humans inhabit through custom and sensation is not the world as it truly is. That step will not happen everywhere in the same way. It will emerge in different civilizations under different pressures, with different vocabularies and ambitions. But the mental ground is ready. The old symbols remain. The old caves remain. The dead remain beneath the earth. The sky still turns overhead. And rituals still bind communities to inherited patterns. Yet now, inside those patterns, a sharper voice is beginning to form. It asks not only what the world means, but whether meaning itself can deceive. It asks not only what is hidden, but whether the visible is already a veil. From here, the road leads toward the ancient world in a more recognizable sense toward cities, temples, writing, argument, and schools of thought. But the most important part of that road was laid long before stone walls and formal teachings. It was laid when human beings learned to mistrust simple appearances without surrendering their need for order. It was laid when they discovered that every act of interpretation both reveals and conceals. And once that discovery is made, the question can finally be named in something like its later form. What if reality is not what it seems? Not because the world is false, but because the mind, the senses, and inherited stories show only part of it. By the time cities rise, writing appears, and temples begin fixing memory in stone rather than only in bodies and stories, humanity is no longer new to uncertainty. The ancient world does not invent the suspicion that reality may be deeper than appearance. It inherits that suspicion from a far older human past and gives it sharper tools. What changes now is not the existence of the problem, but its visibility. Once language can be preserved, compared, argued over, and transmitted beyond living memory, old tensions no longer dissolve with the death of those who felt them. They accumulate. They can be revisited. They can be challenged in explicit form. And so the ancient world becomes the place where prehistoric unease starts turning into something more deliberate reflection about truth itself. This transition is easy to misunderstand. It is tempting to imagine a clean movement from myth to reason, from darkness to clarity, from ritual to thought. The record suggests something much less tidy. Early literate civilizations remain saturated with gods, omens, dreams, sacred lore, divination, and symbolic cosmology. Temples and palaces do not replace older human habits of reading hidden order into the world. In many ways, they intensify them. The sky is still a message. The dead still matter. Ritual still sustains reality. Yet writing does something unprecedented. It makes interpretations visible as interpretations. A claim can now stand outside the moment of speaking. It can be copied, challenged, compared with another claim written elsewhere or earlier. The world is no longer only interpreted through living tradition. It is interpreted through records, and records can disagree. That disagreement matters enormously. In an oral world, contradiction certainly exists, but it is often held within the flexibility of performance, memory, and local authority. In a literate world, contradiction becomes harder to ignore. Two accounts of origins can stand side by side. A dream report can be preserved against an official explanation. Astronomical regularities can be tracked across generations with increasing precision. Ritual formulas can be standardized, and once standardized, their limits become more visible. If the rite is correct and yet the outcome fails, the gap cannot be concealed so easily. Writing sharpens consciousness not only by preserving knowledge, but by exposing inconsistency. It makes the architecture of reality claims more visible to those who live among them. Ancient Mesopotamia offers one of the earliest striking examples of this widened mental world. Here the heavens are watched with extraordinary seriousness. Celestial patterns are recorded, correlated with earthly events, and gradually systematized. This is not yet astronomy in the later scientific sense, nor is it mere superstition. It is a disciplined attempt to understand how visible signs relate to hidden order. The same civilization produces myths of creation, flood, divine kingship, underworld descent, and cosmic struggle. Dream interpretation matters. Omen literature expands. At the same time, practical administration, mathematics, and calendrical reckoning grow more sophisticated. What emerges is not a simple opposition between myth and rationality, but a denser field in which the world can be tracked, measured, narrated, and ritualized all at once. Reality becomes more explicit and more contested simultaneously. Egypt, too, offers a reality thick with visible surfaces and hidden truths. The tomb is not just a resting place, but a machine for continuity. The body is preserved because personhood is thought to depend on complex relations between physical form, name, vitality, and what departs or survives death. Images, spoken formulas, and inscriptions do not merely decorate the burial environment, they help sustain the dead in another mode of existence. To a modern eye, such a system can seem fantastical. In fact, it is intensely logical within its own assumptions. It reflects a civilization already committed to the idea that appearance does not exhaust reality. The body remains, but the person is distributed across multiple dimensions. The name matters. The image matters. The ritual words matter. The visible tomb houses invisible continuities. This is prehistoric questioning of reality made civilizational. Yet literate civilizations do something more than preserve old intuitions. They intensify self-awareness. Once human beings can write laws, hymns, contracts, royal propaganda, laments, and speculative reflections, they begin to encounter the difference between official reality and lived reality in more explicit ways. A king may claim cosmic order while subjects endure famine. A hymn may praise divine justice while grief remains unanswered. A funerary text may promise continuity while the corruption of bodies is plainly known. These are not new contradictions, but they become harder to keep hidden when language is stabilized in public form. The world of signs becomes more powerful, and therefore its failures become more striking. This is where the mental ground begins shifting toward explicit thought. In several ancient traditions, wisdom literature emerges as a form that sits uncomfortably between inherited order and observed contradiction. It asks why the righteous suffer, why fortunes reverse, why death claims all, why the world seems both structured and indifferent. Such texts do not yet reject the sacred framework around them. They work within it, testing its edges. That testing is a major step. It suggests that human beings are now willing not just to repeat reality models, but to place them under pressure in language durable enough to outlast any one speaker. Scholars still debate how far these traditions count as philosophy in the stricter sense. But the point is larger than labels. The old question is becoming more articulate. Reality may be ordered, but what kind of order permits such disorder on the human level? The ancient Mediterranean brings another variation. In the Greek world especially, inherited mythic structures remain powerful, but they coexist with increasing interest in argument, demonstration, and the distinction between seeming and being. This did not appear from nowhere. Trade, colonization, contact with older civilizations, political experimentation, literacy, and public debate all help create conditions where inherited explanations can be compared more openly. But beneath those historical causes lies the much older human inheritance already described. Greeks do not invent the idea that the visible world may conceal deeper truth. They inherit a species-long unease and turn it into sharper conceptual tools. The pre-Socratic thinkers ask what the world is made of, what remains beneath change, whether multiplicity hides underlying unity, whether flux is ultimate or deceptive. Those questions sound new because they are framed with unusual directness, but their emotional ancestry is much older. One surprising continuity is the persistence of threshold language even as reflection becomes more analytical. Ancient thinkers continue to use metaphors of hiddenness, veiling, depth, awakening, and crossing. Truth is something uncovered. Wisdom is something one turns toward. Ignorance is sleep. Darkness, shadow. Appearance mistaken for essence. These metaphors do not belong only to literary style. They reveal that the oldest human experience is night, cave, dream, burial. Emergence into light still structure thought at its most abstract. Philosophy does not escape prehistory. It refines its symbols. There is also a growing separation between different kinds of explanation. Myth may say one thing, cult another, law another, observation another, speculative reasoning another. Once these layers become more distinct, they can be compared in unprecedented ways. This is both liberating and destabilizing. It allows a thinker to ask whether ritual truth and material truth are the same kind of truth. It allows scrutiny of appearances without immediate collapse into social disorder, though that risk never disappears entirely. It also creates the possibility of abstraction. Perhaps what changes is not ultimately real, and what is truly real lies beneath sensory variation. That thought will become central in several ancient traditions, but it only becomes possible because human beings have spent millennia learning that perception is unstable and inherited frameworks are partial. India offers another powerful development of the same old problem. In early South Asian traditions, ritual order, cosmic pattern, and speculative inquiry become deeply entangled. Later, Upanishadic thought, in particular, begins pushing beyond sacrificial formalism toward questions about self, consciousness, illusion, and ultimate reality. The notion that ordinary experience may conceal a deeper truth, and that the self ordinarily identified with body and social role may not be the deepest self, represents one of the most explicit ancient articulations of humanity's old suspicion. Here, as elsewhere, scholars debate continuity, rupture, and historical nuance. But the broad point stands: ancient civilizations across different regions begin naming what prehistory had long lived. The sensed world may be real in one way and misleading in another. China, too, develops sophisticated reflections on order, appearance, and the relation between human perception and the larger pattern of things. Early Chinese thought does not always frame the issue in the same metaphysical terms as Greek or Indian traditions, yet it is equally concerned with alignment between visible conduct and deeper order, between names and realities, between the humanly constructed and the cosmic, in Taoist traditions especially. One finds a suspicion that ordinary distinctions and rigid categories may obscure rather than reveal the fundamental way things are. That intuition belongs to the same family. The problem of reality is now global in expression, though shaped by distinct civilizational paths. What changes most in the ancient world, then, is not the question itself but its explicitness. Humans begin saying more clearly that inherited appearances may not reach the bottom of things. They begin distinguishing between what seems true within ordinary life and what might be true at a deeper level. They test rituals, laws, symbols, and perceptions against one another. They ask whether the self is what it seems, whether the world of change is ultimate, whether language clarifies or distorts, whether tradition preserves wisdom or traps it in repetition. These are recognizably philosophical tensions, but they remain rooted in experiences far older than philosophy dream: death, echo, image, sky, ancestor, threshold, ritual failure, grief. By this point, humanity stands in a new position. It has not abandoned myth, nor escaped sacred worlds, nor ceased to fear the dark or read meaning into the heavens. But it has acquired the ability to step back from its own inherited maps and ask what kind of map a human being is capable of drawing at all. That is the beginning of a more explicit investigation into illusion. If appearances differ from deeper truth, then which appearances deceive most persistently the senses' social convention? Language, desire, fear, memory. The next stage of the story will sharpen that question even further. Humans will no longer only suspect that reality is layered. They will begin naming the layers and accusing the surface of betrayal. At some point, the old suspicion becomes explicit enough to be dangerous. It is one thing to feel that dreams disturb the boundary of waking life, that the dead remain present in memory, that caves and rituals expose hidden layers of the world. It is another to say, clearly and in durable form, that the senses themselves may not be trustworthy, that ordinary social life may be built on illusion, and that what most people call reality could be only a partial surface. Once that claim is made openly, humanity crosses into a new stage of self-awareness. The problem is no longer simply that the world is mysterious. The problem is that human beings may be systematically entangled in appearances that conceal more than they reveal. This is where some of the first philosophical traditions become so striking. They do not merely add new stories to the old stock of myth. They turn questioning inward with greater severity. In the Greek world, for example, the tension between appearance and being becomes one of the defining concerns of early philosophy. Heraclitus sees a world in ceaseless change, a reality whose surface instability may nevertheless conceal a deeper order. Parmenides, by contrast, pushes toward the astonishing claim that change, multiplicity, and ordinary perception are profoundly misleading, that true reality is ungenerated, unchanging, and one. The evidence for exactly how these thinkers intended their arguments remains debated, and later interpretations often sharpen or simplify them. Yet the basic rupture is unmistakable. What the senses report is no longer assumed to be the measure of what is. That move is extraordinary because it does not arise from detached speculation alone. It grows from the long human history already behind it. Once generations have lived with dreams, ritual, symbolic systems, celestial order, contradiction, and the limits of inherited explanation. The idea that ordinary experience may be incomplete is no longer absurd. Philosophy gives that old unease a new discipline. It asks not only whether there are hidden powers behind the world, but whether the world as perceived is itself a problem. It is a severe shift. The eyes, once the primary guides to survival, become suspect. Common sense, once the practical anchor of life, becomes something to overcome rather than trust. Plato will later give one of the most famous forms to this suspicion, though he is building on earlier tensions rather than inventing them from nothing. In the allegory of the cave, human beings live among shadows, mistaking flickering appearances for reality while truth lies elsewhere. Beyond the familiar theatre of perception, the image is famous partly because it is so ancient in structure: the cave, the shadow, the difficult ascent into a more demanding light. These are not arbitrary metaphors. They resonate because humanity has long lived them. Firelight really does distort. Walls really do animate under uncertain conditions. Darkness really does make appearances unstable. Plato turns prehistoric experience into philosophical architecture. He names, with unusual clarity, the idea that most human beings live inside a mediated world and mistake it for the whole. That accusation changes the stakes of reality. Myth had already said that visible life rests on deeper forces. Ritual had already organized the unseen. But philosophy now asks whether ordinary participation in the visible world traps the mind. Social reality itself becomes questionable. Reputation, wealth, political power, inherited custom, sensory pleasure, none of these can be assumed to reveal truth merely because they dominate everyday life. What most people take as obvious may be the very thing that blinds them. That is a frightening conclusion, because it means error is not occasional. It may be structural. Human beings may be born into distortion and require effort, discipline, and sometimes painful separation from common life to see more clearly. Other traditions reach related conclusions in different language. In South Asian thought, especially in later Upanishadic and then more systematically philosophical developments, ordinary identification with the body, the passing world, and the shifting contents of consciousness become something to be questioned at a fundamental level. The self that most people take to be themselves may not be the deepest self. The world of change and attachment may be real in one sense, yet not ultimate. Later formulations around Maya are complex, much debated, and often misunderstood in simplified modern retellings. They do not usually mean that the world is merely fake in a childish sense. Rather, they point toward the idea that ordinary human experience mistakes transient, conditioned appearances for final reality. That is an ancient thought, but here it becomes more rigorous, more explicit, and more demanding. Buddhist traditions take the knife in another direction. Instead of affirming a hidden permanent self behind appearances, many schools emphasize impermanence, dependent origination, and the emptiness of fixed identity. Here again, the everyday world is not denied in a simplistic way. It is reinterpreted. Suffering arises precisely because humans cling to appearances as though they were stable, autonomous, and enduring. What the mind takes to be solid turns out to be composite, transient, relational. This is not identical to Greek metaphysics or Brahmanic speculation, yet it belongs to the same deep family of human discoveries. The surface world, including the self imagined within it, is not what it first seems. To live wisely requires seeing through habitual misperception. In China, especially in Taoist writings, there is a related suspicion toward rigid distinctions, social conventions, and the mind's tendency to carve reality into fixed categories that may obscure rather than reveal the larger pattern. The celebrated dream of Zhuangzi. Whether he is a man who dreamt he was a butterfly or a butterfly, dreaming he is a man returns directly to one of humanity's oldest fractures. Dream and waking are not secure opposites if consciousness itself can inhabit both with conviction. The anecdote is elegant, partly because it distills into a single image what countless prehistoric awakenings had already suggested. Certainty about reality rests on assumptions that may be less stable than they feel. What these traditions share is not doctrine, but a willingness to make a radical claim. Humans do not merely lack information about reality. They're entangled in forms of experience that positively mislead them. Sensory immediacy, social habit, emotional attachment, and inherited conceptual frameworks all create a world that functions well enough for ordinary life while possibly concealing deeper truth. That is why the first time humans question reality never truly ends. It intensifies. Each new framework discovers not only an answer but a new layer of deception. The senses are questioned, then language is questioned, then desire, then memory, then the self. Reality retreats as the methods of access become more refined. There is a peculiar harshness in this stage of thought. Earlier symbolic worlds often cushioned instability with narrative and ritual. Now the mind is asked to endure disillusionment more directly. What you take as the world may be shadow. What you call self may be bundle, process, mask, or mistaken attachment. What you trust as obvious may be produced by ignorance. Even time can become suspect, either as a field of impermanence that tricks beings into clinging, or as the moving image of deeper eternity. This does not make ancient philosophy uniformly bleak. In many traditions, seeing through illusion is tied to liberation, wisdom, tranquility, or alignment with a more fundamental order. But the path begins with a wound to confidence. Reality must first be wrested away from ordinary appearance. One surprising continuity is how physical the metaphors remain. Light and darkness, waking and sleep, ascent and descent, veiling and unveiling, bondage and release, blindness and sight. These are bodily images. They endure because the deepest questions about reality have never been purely abstract. They are rooted in the body's vulnerability to error. A tired body sees badly. A grieving body feels presence in absence. A dreaming body travels without moving. A frightened body mistakes shadows. Ancient philosophy inherits these bodily lessons and transforms them into conceptual structures, but it never fully leaves the body behind. Truth is still imagined as something one turns toward, emerges into, wakes up to. It is also worth noticing that these traditions do not simply destroy older symbolic worlds. They reinterpret them. The cave becomes allegory. Ritual becomes discipline. Mythic cycles become metaphysical teaching. Meditation replaces or refines earlier trance. Ethical conduct becomes a method for clarifying perception. In this way, explicit thought does not abolish humanity's prehistoric inheritance. It translates it. The old threshold experiences remain, but now they are used to investigate the machinery of illusion itself. By this point, the ancient question has reached remarkable clarity. Humans can now say, in multiple civilizational vocabularies, that what appears most immediate may be least ultimate. They can propose that reality is hidden not only by nature's mystery but by the structure of human consciousness. They can argue that liberation depends on seeing through appearance rather than merely surviving within it. This is the first time the problem is truly named, not simply hidden powers, not merely sacred order but illusion, seeming, mistaking the part for the whole. And yet naming the problem does not solve it, it enlarges it. Once reality has been identified as something possibly concealed by perception, every later generation inherits the burden. Science will approach it differently. Religion will preserve some older versions. Modern philosophy will sharpen doubt into new forms. But the ancient breakthrough remains one of the decisive moments in human history. The species finally says out loud what it had been circling for tens of thousands of years. The world we move through each day may be real enough to wound us, feed us, and bury us, but it may not be reality in full. That realization does not end the story. It ensures the story continues, because once humans learn to suspect the surface, they can never again inhabit it innocently. Every shadow becomes a possibility. Every certainty carries a hidden question. And the first ancient thinkers who named the problem did not close a chapter. They opened one that is still unfolding. Once the suspicion has been named, it never retreats fully into silence again. Humanity can continue farming, trading, warring, worshipping, building cities, reciting laws, and burying its dead. But beneath all of it, the old disturbance remains active. The senses are useful and still not final. Ritual can bind a world together and still not settle what the world is. Myth can explain. Philosophy can strip explanation down to structure, and yet both leave behind the same lingering pressure. There is always more than appears. The first time humans questioned reality was not a brief episode deep in prehistory. It was the opening of a permanent condition. From that point on, every civilization inherits not only tools, stories, and institutions, but a wound in certainty. What makes this so enduring is that the question survives every answer by changing form. In one age it is asked through dreams and the returning dead. In another, it is asked through sacred order and hidden cosmic law. Later it becomes a matter of illusion, knowledge, perception, language, selfhood. Much later still it will move into theology, skepticism, science, metaphysics, and the philosophy of mind. But the structure remains eerily consistent. Human beings discover that they do not stand before reality as neutral observers. They stand within it as interpreting creatures whose bodies, memories, fears, desires, and symbolic inheritances shape what can be known. That discovery cannot be undone by progress. It deepens with progress. This is why the ancient question survives so powerfully into the present. Science does not abolish it. In some ways, science intensifies it. Instruments reveal wavelength the eye cannot see, timescales the body cannot feel, cosmic distances no direct intuition can grasp, microscopic worlds beneath ordinary touch, and physical laws that routinely contradict what common sense expects. Matter is not solid in the way it feels. Time is not simple in the way daily life implies. Consciousness remains stubbornly difficult to explain in purely material terms, even as neuroscience maps the brain with increasing sophistication. Perception, modern research confirms again and again, is constructive rather than passive. The brain filters, predicts, edits. What we experience as a seamless world is partly manufactured stability. This is not the same as ancient metaphysics, but it rhymes with it. The evidence remains incomplete in many areas, and no single explanation fully accounts for consciousness or subjective experience. Yet the broad result is unmistakable. The more humans learn, the less reality resembles what it first seemed to be. At the same time, modern life creates new caves of shadow. Screens present images with extraordinary force, shaping emotion, identity, memory, and collective belief. Simulations, narratives, political mythologies, ideologies, and algorithmic realities organize experience at scales prehistoric people could never have imagined. A person can now live inside representations almost continuously, mistaking constructed environments for unfiltered truth. Plato's cave remains famous because it no longer feels antique. It feels updated. Humanity still sits before moving shadows, except now many of them are self-produced, globally distributed, and reinforced by machines built to hold attention. The old human vulnerability to appearance has not been cured by technology. It has been industrialized. And still the older layers persist beneath the newer ones. The dead continue returning in dreams. Grief still makes absence behave like presence. Sacred places still alter perception. Ritual, even in secular societies, survives in disguised forms because repetition remains one of the few ways humans know to stabilize uncertainty. We gather around marked dates, repeat gestures, preserve names, build memorials, carry heirlooms, revisit graves, watch the sky, search for patterns in disaster, and attach meanings to landscapes. The prehistoric inheritance remains intact under modern surfaces. We have not stopped being the species that sees more than it can prove and doubts what it sees at the very moment of seeing it. This continuity may be the most important part of the story. The first time humans questioned reality, they were not making a mistake that later knowledge would correct. They were discovering something fundamental about the human situation. Reality is not given to us whole. It reaches us through limited senses, social worlds, inherited categories, and minds evolved for survival rather than perfect truth. Yet those same limits are also what make deeper inquiry possible. Because appearance can mislead, Humans learn to compare, test, remember, symbolize, reason, and imagine beyond the immediate. The fracture between world and perception is painful, but it is also generative. Without it, there is no philosophy, no science, no theology, no art in its highest sense, no long human attempt to cross from seeming into understanding. There is a dry irony here. The species became powerful because it learned not to trust the surface completely. A rustle might hide a predator, a season might turn before it is visible, a face might conceal intention. But the same capacity that kept early humans alive eventually grew large enough to destabilize everything, including the mind that used it. Humans became so good at inferring hidden causes that they could no longer rest easily in the obvious. They built myths to house the hidden, rituals to negotiate it, philosophies to dissect it, sciences to measure it, and still the hidden remains. That does not mean the effort fails. It means the question belongs to beings like us by nature. Scholars still debate many parts of this long history. The exact meanings of Paleolithic art remain uncertain. The earlier symbolic systems can only be partially reconstructed. Ritual specialists leave indirect traces. Burial does not speak in one voice. Oral traditions vanish more easily than stone, and whole mental worlds are lost beyond recovery. That uncertainty should remain visible. The evidence is fragmentary, and no honest account can pretend otherwise. Yet across those fragments a broad arc is clear enough. Human beings move from reacting to the world, to interpreting it, to suspecting that interpretation itself might be incomplete. They learned, step by step, that reality may exceed not only the senses, but every framework built to contain it. And that is the legacy. Not one doctrine, not one civilization's answer, not one final theory, but a permanent human posture alert, doubtful, imaginative, pattern-seeking, wounded by illusion and unable to stop looking past it. The first questioning of reality did not happen once. It happened whenever a dream felt truer than morning, whenever a corpse remained while the person vanished, whenever a painted animal seemed to move in firelight, whenever the sky darkened at the wrong hour, whenever one explanation failed and another only partly satisfied, whenever a thinker dared to say that the world of ordinary appearances might not be ultimate. Those moments do not belong only to the remote past. They still happen. They happen in laboratories, in temples, in grief, in art, in solitude, in philosophy, in the quiet seconds after waking when one world has not yet released its grip and another has not fully taken hold. So the first time humans questioned reality is also the last time, and the next time, and the one unfolding now. It began in darkness, in memory, in fear, in wonder, in the slow realization that the world is never encountered raw. It arrives filtered, shaped, doubled. And ever since, the human story has been a long attempt not merely to survive inside that fact, but to understand what kind of reality could produce a creature compelled to ask such a thing at all. That question is one of the oldest things we have. It may also be one of the few that will remain after many of our answers are gone. The fire has burned low now, and the old landscape is quiet again. Somewhere beyond the circle of light there are still animals moving through grass, cold wind crossing stone, and the invisible work of night continuing without witness. That part has not changed as much as people imagine. What changed was the mind that sat beside the fire and realized, with a kind of slow astonishment, that the darkness outside was not the only darkness to reckon with. There was another one within perception itself, within memory, within dream, within the strange distance between what the world is and what it feels like. Since then, humans have crossed continents, buried their dead under mounds and beneath cathedral floors, raised observatories, written scriptures, built philosophies, tested matter, split atoms, mapped the brain, and sent instruments into the dark between planets. And still, at the edge of all that effort, the same old uncertainty remains. We know more than our ancestors could have imagined, and yet reality has not become simpler. In some ways it has become stranger. The universe is larger. Time deeper, matter less solid, consciousness no less mysterious. The old shadows have not vanished, they have only changed shape. Perhaps that is why the deep past continues to feel so close in moments like these. Not because prehistoric humans were exactly like us, or because their worlds can be recovered without distortion, but because they reached a threshold that we have never truly left. They discovered that the visible world is never enough by itself, that a body can be present and a person absent, that an image can carry life without breathing, that the sky can look eternal and still break, that symbols can steady the mind without exhausting the truth, that even our most trusted senses may be guides rather than judges. What survives across all those vanished camps? Buried bones, painted walls, sacred stories, and difficult philosophies is not certainty, but companionship in uncertainty. Others stood here before us, in colder nights, with fewer answers, and felt the same disturbance. They looked at stone, shadow, dream, and death, and sensed that reality ran deeper than appearance. They did not solve the problem, neither have we, but they named it in gesture, in ritual, in image, in story, and eventually in thought, and by naming it they made a certain kind of human life possible. So the story ends where it began, with a person awake in the half-light, listening to a world that refuses to become fully transparent. The fire shifts, a face in the dark becomes only stone again. The dead remain gone, and not entirely gone. The stars move in their old silence overhead, and somewhere, in that quiet space between what is seen and what is understood, the ancient question still waits, patient as ever, asking nothing more and nothing less than what it asked at the beginning: what is real, and how would we ever know?